After sending Cassian out to handle the birds, Ruel turns back to his files and starts thinking about Liberin, the suspicious baron of Prios. A knock breaks his thoughts, and Billow arrives with news from the captured Red Ash men. Billow says he forced one prisoner to talk, and Ruel hears him out while idly sharing cookies with Leo, almost too calm for the danger in the room. The confession says a Red Ash killer is after Ruel, and Billow adds that Liberin reached into Soteria by using Flen and Prios' weakness. When Billow reveals Prios is supposedly being ruled by a collateral branch, Ruel instantly realizes something is badly wrong and starts smiling instead of panicking. Billow explains the truth. Liberin found Prios' disgraceful secret, seized control of its reckless family head, and turned the whole house into his puppet. Ruel decides the game just got interesting and orders Billow to compare Flen's testimony with this new confession. Before leaving, Billow awkwardly asks whether Ruel's illness is improving, and the question lands badly. Ruel brushes the question aside, and Billow quickly apologizes for crossing the line before he leaves. Once Billow is gone, Leo notices Ruel is irritated, and Ruel admits he does not need anyone fussing over him besides Cassian. Ruel recognizes Billow's guilt-driven loyalty, but instead of pushing harder, he decides to rest before his body crashes again. He tells restless Leo he is only resting because overworking now could knock him out for days. Ruel falls asleep to the sound of Leo's tiny footsteps, completely drained. Later, Cassian slips into the dark room without knocking and quietly checks on the sleeping Ruel while Leo hushes him from beside the bed. Cassian decides not to wake him for dinner, leaves the meal for Leo and the knights instead, and quietly darkens the room so Ruel can keep sleeping. The next morning, Ruel wakes ravenous and starts devouring meat pie before his eyes are even fully open. After tearing through 7 slices, Ruel finally looks less ghostly and jokes that some hungry thing inside him must be devouring everything he eats. Cassian reminds him the tailor is coming again, and Ruel grumbles that his shrinking body has already forced too many alterations. When Cassian jokes that Leo is the one gaining weight, Ruel points to the beast and the power in his chest as the true thieves of his food. Ruel asks about the investigation into Liberin, but Cassian warns this opponent has hidden his tracks well and needs more time. He learns the birds have already started training with the knights, which means his forced alliance is being folded into Soteria's power structure. Ruel asks about Tyson's latest project, and hears he is researching a buried magic device that could raise a shield across all of Soteria. Then Ruel turns to the underworld and orders Cassian to keep the back alleys under watch until one clear boss rises. He makes his real policy plain. If the back alley cannot be erased, he will tame it and use it. Remembering today's Baron meeting, Ruel dryly lists how much Soteria has improved and asks what ridiculous topic they could possibly still be discussing. Cassian finally says the Barons want to discuss Ruel's marriage, and Ruel rejects the idea on the spot. Annoyed that even Minute could not shut that down, Ruel changes the agenda himself and orders them to focus on warp devices instead. After Cassian leaves, Ruel turns to Leo with a sly smile and proposes a game with Eris to strengthen both their attribute control. Leo immediately agrees because he wants to protect Ruel better, and his simple, possessive loyalty makes Ruel soften. At the next meal, Eris is startled when Ruel suddenly tells him to play with Leo. Ruel explains he wants Eris to learn from how spirits handle nature, and Eris lights up because Leo's power fascinated him before. Ruel then catches Eris off guard by asking if being an adventurer is fun, exposing the secret side job Eris thought he had hidden. Eris apologizes, but Ruel tells him he made a good choice and even praises him for using that identity well. Ruel says adventurer status lets Eris move anywhere, even around nobles, so he wants him ready to use it whenever needed. Then Ruel casually says he plans to rest for a while, and both Cassian and Eris go still because his idea of resting is never reassuring. Cassian quietly asks if he is sick, and Eris anxiously checks too, but Ruel insists this is just his normal condition. Even after checking Ruel's breathing, fever, and familiar cough, Cassian still cannot trust what Ruel means by resting. Cassian tries to cancel the meeting and rush the tailor, but Ruel refuses and says he will still show his face at the meeting, even if only briefly. Later, the tailor is simply relieved Ruel has not shrunk too much again, and the Baron stays so focused on Ruel's mood that nobody dares bring up marriage. The warp device discussion gets postponed to the next meeting, and by the time Ruel returns to bed he feels more exhausted than he expected. As Cassian tells him to change and lie down, Leo suddenly senses the built-up filth in Ruel's body and lunges to eat it. The sudden purge rips through Ruel so violently that he convulses and spits black blood into Cassian's waiting magic handkerchief. Cassian, absurdly practical in the middle of it, scolds Leo for dirtying the fresh bedding and reminds him to get permission next time. Once the pain passes, Ruel feels lighter, but he can only dryly thank Cassian for hiding all the bloody evidence from the servants. With Cassian gone, Ruel uses the moment to start another kind of treatment, and asks Leo to help him train again. Ruel opens the window, sets his cane aside, and starts trying to stand and move on his own while Leo catches him with wind each time he falters. As he keeps forcing his body forward, Ruel makes a hard promise to himself. He will walk, run, learn magic, and become strong enough to protect himself. He wakes the next morning on the floor under a blanket ringed with warming stones, and Cassian immediately wants to know what reckless thing happened this time. Ruel realizes he blacked out during training, but he also notices he slept without the usual dawn suffocation and guesses the inherited power is finally settling in. Instead of breakfast, Cassian hands him fresh intelligence. Librin is secretly gathering people and planning to move something through Soteria. The message is damning. Someone is ordered to bribe Soteria's gate guards in advance for the shipment, proving Librin is moving underhandedly inside their territory. Ruel immediately counters by ordering Cassian to buy one of the adventurers and swap the transport roster with their own people. When Cassian asks if he is coming too, Ruel says he will not repeat the same recklessness as before, but he does intend to meet the head of Prios directly. Ruel fixes the schedule on the spot. They will leave in 5 days, ahead of the shipment, so he can prepare before Librin makes his move. After sending Cassian away, Ruel calls Tyson in and asks for a favor that will push his body to its limit. He hands Tyson the bracelet he got from Ganian and asks him to reinforce it just enough to let him stand and move while wearing it. Tyson warns that even a magic item can overstrain Ruel's body, but Ruel says he only wants it strengthened to the point he can still endure. When Tyson asks why, Ruel finally says it plainly. He wants to move as much as he can and stop using illness as an excuse to stay helpless. Ruel lays out the threat in full. Red Ash has been targeting him and Soteria for a long time, using nobles, traffickers, and family secrets with too much precision to be random. He warns that one day those enemies will start removing everyone around him too, and he refuses to just sit still and watch because his body is weak. Tyson is terrified that helping again might break Ruel the way magic once did before, and for a moment, he cannot answer at all. Ruel softens just enough to reassure him, saying he trusts Tyson and knows exactly what risk he is asking for. Then Ruel delivers the core of it. Even if his body stays weak, he refuses to let his mind stay weak too, and he asks Tyson to help him become strong. Tyson finally gives in, painfully but sincerely, and agrees to help Ruel walk that dangerous path. 5 days into his walking training, Ruel surprises Cassian by filling out his clothes with actual muscle. Ruel proudly stands up without his cane, even if the effort still leaves him dizzy for a second. When Cassian realizes Ruel has been secretly training, he admits he underestimated him. Leo proudly offers to help again, and Ruel says the strength he wants is just enough to protect himself. Cassian bluntly tells him the truth. With a body this frail, using a sword or proper magic would only break him again. Ruel still sets his goal high. One day he wants to run around without depending on magic items. Then Tyson arrives and freezes when he sees Ruel standing on his own without any magic support. Proud of that progress, Tyson gives Ruel the bracelet he prepared to help him move further. Cassian immediately objects because too much mana could poison Ruel, but Ruel cuts him off and says he needs it. Ruel says he needs the bracelet with such force that even Cassian finally gives up on stopping him. Ruel puts the bracelet on, and the incoming mana instantly crashes against his power of resistance. The adjustment is brutal, and blood starts running from Ruel's nose and mouth almost at once. Even while hurting, Ruel insists this pain is bearable because enduring it is the only way forward. Tyson finally tries to stop him, but Ruel only shakes his head and keeps forcing his body through the clash. Ruel shuts his eyes and endures until his power of resistance starts growing under the pressure. The strain peaks when Ruel bends forward and coughs blood into a handkerchief. Tyson gets under him just in time. Leo tries to steady the room's panic, insisting that Ruel is still okay. When the violent reaction finally goes quiet, Ruel opens his eyes and smiles because he knows he endured it. For Ruel, that moment feels like reaching the real starting line for the changes he wants ahead. After that breakthrough, Ruel heads toward Prios in an unmarked carriage so he can meet its family head discreetly. On the road, Ruel relaxes with cookies while Eris cheerfully notes that the wound on his arm has already healed. Leo almost blurts out the real reason Ruel heals fast, but one cookie is enough to distract him completely. Ruel then tells Eris the real mission ahead. After meeting Prios, he will join a large adventure operation tied to a sealed object. He makes one thing clear first: Eris and the others will do the work, while he only observes. Then Ruel explains why that still is not enough. Cassian already failed once because the target item could not be removed safely. Cassian reveals the problem is item disposition magic, a trap that burns the object if the wrong trigger is met. That means once the agent says the trigger word, any secret grab is over before it begins. Eris suggests handling the seal from the shadows, but Cassian shuts that down because his people are not wizards. Tyson cannot come either, because the route runs through Masu Forest, and that is the moment Eris finally understands why Ruel has to go himself. Ruel calmly adds one more reason for insisting on the mission: he wants to see the mysterious item with his own eyes. At Prios, Ruel gives his real name at the gate, and the soldier panics so badly that he runs inside without even checking proof. Even though he can walk now, Ruel keeps using the cane because he has no intention of dropping his sickly image. On the way in, Ruel quietly tells Cassian there is something here he intends to pick up, but he keeps the answer to himself. The rude reception at the mansion annoys Ruel, so he decides he will not bother with manners either. Right before entering, Cassian warns that too many hidden eyes are watching the room. Ruel walks in anyway and finds Caitlin Prios hunched over the table, biting his hand like a man already cornered. When Caitlin gives a flimsy excuse about being unwell, Ruel skips courtesy and orders Eris to clean out the flies first. Eris draws his sword and starts cutting down the hidden watchers around the room while Catelyn panics. While the screams and sword sounds fill the room, Ruel sits down calmly and starts questioning Catelyn instead of the corpses around him. Ruel's first question cuts straight through the noise. How did a collateral-line man like Catelyn become Lord? By the time Eris sheathes his sword, Catelyn finally notices the blood and bodies around him and throws up in shock. Ruel presses harder and demands to know who actually put Catelyn on Prios's throne. Under that pressure, Catelyn finally answers that his mother made him Lord. Ruel sees straight through him and asks the real question. Does Catelyn feel like dying from living this fake life? That breaks him, and Catelyn starts crying as he admits he really does feel that way. Ruel offers him a way out of Libran's grip, but only if Catelyn comes under him instead. Catelyn's first reaction is despair, because he assumes this only means trading one leash for another. So Ruel changes the angle and asks whether Catelyn can really abandon Prios when no proper direct heir remains. Catelyn admits Prios might collapse if he vanished, because the true line already ran away and left everything behind. After a hard coughing fit of his own, Ruel points out that a lord cannot just disappear when an entire territory would fall with him. That is the turning point, because Catelyn finally admits he cannot leave Prios behind after all. Ruel accepts that answer and tells him to live proudly as the true head of Prios instead of a fake. Then Ruel lays down his real terms, and they are shockingly simple. Do not look down on Soteria, and help Soteria. Catelyn can barely believe it, because he expects surveillance, greed, and exploitation, not trust. Ruel openly dismisses Prios as not even worth squeezing dry, because Soteria already gives him more than enough power and standing. He goes even further and tells Catelyn to remember this meeting publicly as nothing more than a failed attempt to borrow money. Then Ruel impatiently orders him to stop staring and swear the mana oath already. Catelyn accepts like a drowning man grabbing a rope, smiling for the first time as he swears loyalty. After the oath, Catelyn repeats the cover story cleanly, and Ruel confirms they have never officially met. Ruel promises he will drive out the rat and erase Catelyn's stigma, and by then the frightened puppet from the start is gone. Ruel leaves the room wearing an angry act for appearances, while behind the closed door Catelyn finally breaks down in grateful tears because, for the first time, he can breathe. Once he gets inside the carriage, Ruel finally drops the angry act and clutches his stomach, showing the strain he hid outside. Eris praises Ruel for turning the Prios mess into a win, but Ruel insists he was already greedy enough after learning Prios' weakness and securing loyalty. Cassian points out the real pride of Prios was its artisans, and Ruel is annoyed he did not demand more of them while he had the chance. Leo casually says the black corruption inside Ruel is growing, but his body is already too full to eat more right now. Cassian drives them toward the inn and quietly notes that Ruel stayed conscious this time, which means his condition held up better than before. When Ruel reaches out, Cassian pulls preserved warm meat pies from his pocket, saying Estelle prepared food that Ruel's body can actually handle. At the escort briefing in the inn, Fox-masked Ruel keeps crunching snacks through the meeting and immediately gets on the agent's nerves. Ruel shamelessly says it is medicine time, then keeps swallowing bitter herbal pills while the agent lays out the 4-wagon escort job. As the route through Masu Forest to Kron is explained, Ruel stays half-bored on the surface while already locking onto the sealed item he plans to steal. Ruel snacks through the briefing and feeds hidden Leo under the table, while Cassian leans in to warn him not to waste their limited food. Eris draws lot number 3 for their team, and Ruel calmly listens to the other assigned names while already deciding any obstacle can be removed. When the huge pay is announced, the other adventurers light up, but Ruel reads it as proof this fake merchant outfit is disposable bait. When Ruel quietly asks how strong the others are, Cassian dismisses them as weaker than Eris on purpose, and Eris bristles at being used as the comparison. An annoyed adventurer tells them to keep it down, but Ruel smooths it over with a polite apology that leaves the man too nervous to push further under Eris and Cassian's stares. After the meeting, Ruel takes one look at their 2 solo teammates and writes them off as dead weight. Ruel invites the 2 men out for drinks, and they take the bait instantly, happy to follow him to Prios' famous bitter beer tavern. Once the bait is set, Ruel and Cassian quietly agree the symptom will be stomachache, and the 2 extra teammates will be out of action for days. At the tavern, Eris collapses after barely touching alcohol, while Ruel keeps drinking with dangerous enthusiasm because his current body has never had the chance before. The 2 disposable teammates disappear to the bathroom and never come back, leaving Cassian to watch Eris pass out and Ruel drink himself toward trouble. Ruel suddenly realizes something is wrong because he is getting drunk far too fast, and Cassian cuts him off at once. 1 second later, Ruel drops face first onto the table, proving alcohol is another thing his body cannot handle. By dawn, Eris is only hungover, but Ruel is vomiting black blood as Leo happily says the black filth inside him has become even tastier. Ruel can barely ask for medicine, and Cassian warns that if he is not better by 4:15, he will be sent back to Soteria under Hina's protection. Ruel coughs up one more wave of black blood and then recovers just in time, standing without a cane as his recovery power works faster than before. Eris hangs his head in shame for fainting after 1 drink, but Ruel brushes it off because drinking skill means nothing to an escort. Ruel presses Leo about the black corruption, and Leo says it has become thicker even though his own body did not grow from eating it. At the departure point, the agent notices their other two teammates are missing, and Masked Ruel smoothly says the group drank together last night but he has not seen the men since. When the agent offers replacements, Ruel declines on the spot because he would rather move with the three people already used to working together. The convoy finally rolls out at 6, and while the agent keeps stressing how priceless the cargo is, Ruel rides out coughing and swallowing more medicine. At Satyria's gate, the convoy runs into a deliberate inspection, and while the agent argues outside, Ruel watches the delay from the wagon with quiet interest. Ruel watches the delay like a satisfied spectator, because he secretly ordered Baron Will to hold up any merchant convoy using the name Carpin. Even a bribe and Prios's flower symbol fail, because the Satyria soldier points to his own shield and makes it clear that no one is an exception here. The convoy loses 2.5 hours at the gate, and by the time it finally rolls through, the adventurers are already tired, irritated, and shaken. Halfway through Masu Forest, with no monsters appearing naturally, Cassian gives the quiet signal that it is time for Ruel's real plan to begin. Leo hates the forest, but Ruel gently tells him to sleep because he is about to waste the monster control power instead of letting it sit unused. Ruel starts summoning monsters one by one toward the convoy, and the instant he does, a shrill pain drills through his head. He keeps calling more monsters anyway, smiling through a nosebleed while warning Eris that his role in the plan is the most important one. Dozens of monsters answer him, and Ruel endures the mounting agony until he decides the number is finally enough. The forest starts thundering with approaching footsteps, and Ruel knows the trap has reached the convoy. As the cry of monster attack erupts, Eris jumps out first while Cassian follows, leaving Ruel to steady himself for the next step. Ruel drags himself out and orders the monsters to target only the first wagon, because that is where the real sealed item is hidden. Grotesque monsters slam into the convoy, and the adventurers instinctively abandon formation to save themselves as panic tears through the line. The agent finally bails out of the first wagon and hides among the adventurers, giving Ruel the opening he needed. With the guard's eyes pulled away, Ruel edges closer to the first wagon while Cassian quietly relays the shifting battlefield to Eris. Eris slips into the mess like just another fighter, carving down a monster and leaving himself marked enough to look naturally involved. At Ruel's command, the monsters bolt back into the forest, and the surviving adventurers instantly mistake the retreat for a real victory. Eris quietly confirms success, because during the confusion he unlocked the defense system, swapped the target, and restored the protection without anyone noticing. Inside the wagon, Eris shows Ruel the real prize, a ruby necklace wrapped in an extremely delicate seal. When Ruel asks if the seal can be removed, Eris answers without hesitation, proving why his talent matters so much here. The agent opens the wagon to check for missing cargo, and Cassian smoothly assures him nothing here was touched. As soon as the agent leaves, Ruel starts coughing blood again and orders Eris to keep going while he leans back against the wagon wall. Leo wakes and senses even more dirty black matter inside Ruel, but Ruel says nothing because he does not want to worry the other two further. Spent by monster control, Ruel gives one last order to wake him when the unsealing is done and then falls into a rough, uneven sleep. While Ruel sleeps, Cassian quietly tells Eris to keep passing breath to him if his breathing worsens and not to wake him too early. Ruel jerks awake when the carriage stops and is greeted by the sight of Cassian casually cutting a man's throat inside the chaos outside. Cassian treats it like nothing and tells Ruel that, just as expected, Red Ash has shown up to wipe out the hired adventurers before the convoy arrived. Leo bounces back proudly and says he gathered everything shiny, so Ruel realizes Cassian used him to collect jewels from the dead. Cassian reports that the agent was captured alive under Hina's watch and that Eris has already removed the seals better than expected. A fresh blast rocks the carriage, and Cassian explains that Eris is outside testing magic while fighting an enemy wizard. Ruel looks up at the embroidered colors of clashing magic in the sky and calmly realizes the next blast is about to go off. Inside the carriage, Ruel coldly warns the captured agent not to say one wrong thing, and the terrified man nearly bows to the floor under his mana oath. Cassian immediately spots the hole in the cover story. The agent claims he survived a bloody ambush, but he somehow does not have a single injury. Before reaching the meeting, Ruel makes the agent repeat the fake introduction and the whole excuse about a patrol fight, dead bodies left in Masu Forest, and no traces remaining. When the story finally lines up, Ruel has the agent keep reporting to Liberin as if everything is still going according to plan. Feeling a little better than before, Ruel steadies himself the way he always does now. He takes a cookie from Cassian and even sneaks one to Leo. As the carriage rolls on, Ruel fixes on the real goal now: follow this lead, find the organization behind it, and wipe out the threat blocking his peaceful future. At the Neutral Zone restaurant, the contact finally appears alone, and the exchange stays exactly inside the script Ruel prepared. Cassian hands over the ruby-studded necklace, and during that brief touch he secretly plants a tracking trail on the courier. The courier leaves at once, and Ruel sends the agent away too, ordering him to gather evidence and stay hidden until called. Then the chase turns stranger. Cassian says the courier smelled like blood, and both he and Eris realize someone else was already tracking the man. That possibility jolts Ruel into action, because if another force already knows Red Ash, he cannot afford to move slowly. Outside, Cassian reads the trail from the soil and confirms the courier left the neutral zone for the forest, where a waiting horse carried him away. When Cassian asks whether Ruel can ride, Ruel has to admit he cannot, and Cassian takes a quiet, merciless little jab at the noble who never learned horseback basics. For safety, Ruel rides behind Cassian while Eris takes the other horse with Leo, and Cassian bluntly promises to fix this gap before rumors spread about a lord who cannot ride. The rough ride quickly teaches Ruel that horses are miserable, unstable creatures, and he can only grit his teeth while Cassian handles the chase effortlessly. The pursuit suddenly stops when Cassian senses the courier has been caught already, and all three notice another presence hiding in the woods. A strange man steps out with a sword and a paper marked by 7 blades through a heart, then announces that a prince wants to see them. When the messenger reveals it is the third prince, Banios Laponia, Ruel is thrown off because that powerless prince should have had nothing to do with Red Ash. Ruel takes his cane before going in, because dealing with a prince is dangerous in a different way from hunting criminals. Deeper in the forest, Ruel finds Banios waiting with dozens of disciplined soldiers, turning the hidden clearing into a full royal operation. Banios greets Ruel warmly enough to feel suspicious, and Ruel can only wonder when exactly they became this familiar. The mystery breaks a little when Banios says Ganian Croft talked Ruel up so much that he already feels like he knows him. Banios casually admits he intercepted Ganian on the way to Soteria, dragged him into a match, and won his cooperation after watching him crush more than 100 soldiers without tiring. To talk seriously, Banios dismisses his soldiers, and the clearing empties with military precision until only the key people remain. Banios tells Ruel to sit because he already knows how sick he is, and Ruel's coughing fit forces him to obey the prince's order. Once seated, Ruel drops the mask and gets straight to the real question. How did Banios learn enough to be waiting here for him? Banios reveals it started with a suspicious letter from Carbina pretending to handle Soteria, and that old name alone makes Ruel instantly fed up. When Ruel says Mineta must have been acting as Banios' agent in Soteria, Banios is genuinely surprised and realizes someone had been hiding the truth even from the royal family. Ruel tries to shut the discussion down early, but Banios bluntly points out that he still came all this way chasing Red Ash, so he clearly has not stepped away at all. Banios explains that he quietly investigated Soteria because the kingdom's gates had been opened and Ruel, the rightful lord, was left in prison while everyone looked away. He says he began digging 3 years ago, broke through the surveillance around Soteria, and even managed to get the second prince's eyes and ears under control. Then Banios finally lays out his real request. He wants the throne, and he wants Soteria to support him. Ruel refuses to bite right away and pushes the conversation back to the urgent problem first. Red Ash is inside the kingdom, and that threat has to be dealt with before crowns. Banios agrees Soteria is still the kingdom's gatekeeper and shares the one hard lead he has, Liberin, and a likely Red Ash stronghold inside Cyronian. Ruel answers Banios' lead with one of his own, having Cassian produce a copied document from the ruby necklace and springing the surprise on the prince. The paper turns out to be a confidential attack plan: kill Ruel, collapse Soteria, and use the kingdom's secret passageways to crush the royal family too. Banios is furious, but Ruel cannot tell him who wrote it yet, because his next step had been to chase the courier home and beat the answers out of Liberin. As the meaning sinks in, Ruel realizes again that Red Ash keeps targeting him first, as if the sick noble who should have died is a far more dangerous piece than anyone expected. Ruel openly pokes at the obvious political rot and asks whether the second prince's side is also tied to Red Ash, which makes Banios laugh because it hits too close to the truth. Banios admits he used to shut his eyes and ears because he never thought the throne was his, and now his camp only has 3 supporting families behind it. The moment Ruel hears Prios and Lumina among those allies, he understands why Banios came to Soteria anyway. Even with 3 houses, he still needs the kingdom's gatekeeper. So Ruel stops pretending to be humble and says it plainly: if Banios wants Soteria's weight, then he has to give Ruel everything he wants to survive. Cassian sighs like Ruel just caused trouble again. Eris clenches his fist in admiration, and Leo fidgets because his lord has gone too far and somehow pulled it off anyway. Banios starts to bristle, but he also knows Ruel is right. The side that needs urgent help here is not Soteria but the prince who only has 3 houses to stand on. In the end, Banios laughs, calls Ruel exactly the kind of big shot Ganian described, and agrees to seal their cooperation with a mana oath not to betray each other. With that baseline trust in place, Ruel claims Liberin as his target and orders Banios to pull back the ears he planted in Soteria instead of listening in any deeper. Ruel presses one question Banios still cannot answer cleanly: why does Red Ash keep coming for him personally instead of treating Soteria itself as the real target? When Banios can only say he is the lord of Soteria, Ruel realizes he will have to dig through his own house's history later if he wants the truth. Before they part, Banios offers a practical gift instead of a grand promise. He will send a doctor and pharmacist he trusts to help keep Ruel alive. He also gives Ruel a ring that works as a direct communicator, adding one more dangerous little royal connection to Ruel's already crowded hands. Banios takes custody of the captured man for his own side's operation, promises to send him toward the suspected Red Ash stronghold, and leaves the clearing first. After the prince disappears, Ruel finally lets out a long breath and admits to himself that if Soteria keeps growing, it will keep attracting exactly this kind of powerful attention. He decides to head back and rest before making any move on Liberin, because his body is already close to its limit. Before returning to the mansion, Ruel stops at the Wind Guild and asks Flen to spread selective request information so their side looks steadily active instead of idle. Flen brightens instantly, because even a few hard requests being known as solved will boost the guild's influence and make the story look naturally impressive. Ruel quietly ties the story together by confirming where they supposedly stayed and how satisfied the client was, making the manufactured reputation sound perfectly ordinary. While Flen gets a room ready, Ruel starts assigning the next step. Eris and Leo will handle the requests in front, and Cassian will only step in if the work gets too hard. Leo agrees the moment Ruel offers ice cream as a reward, proving again that the mighty little creature is ridiculously easy to win over. Eris confidently accepts the role, and even Cassian, despite his obvious dislike for this setup, finally agrees to support from the rear. Once Flen returns, Ruel takes the medicine and handkerchief Cassian prepared and heads to the room with one order: no one is to disturb him. The second the door closes, the mask drops completely and Ruel vomits bright red blood onto the floor. He sinks down shaking, furious that every time he thinks he is improving, his body lurches back toward killing him again. Lying there, Ruel starts piecing the pattern together, and decides this feels less like an illness and more like something malicious, almost intentional. He rules out ordinary magic because Tyson would have noticed that, and the answer that finally rises in his mind is a curse. That possibility makes Red Ash look even worse, because both the group and this curse-like condition sit outside everything Ruel remembers from the original story. The timeline lines up too neatly to ignore. His condition first exploded around the same time Red Ash was moving around Carbina 5 years ago. Barely able to move, Ruel calls for Hina, and she appears at once with water because Cassian already expected this hidden crash. Hina refuses to let him hold the cup himself, bluntly saying Cassian warned that he would probably break it after coughing up blood. Ruel apologizes out of habit, and Hina brushes it off so casually that the exchange lands as unexpectedly warm in the middle of all this pain. As she helps him onto the bed, Ruel even corrects himself mid-breath and tells her Cassian should stop overworking all of them, not just her. Still chasing answers, Ruel asks Hina what she knows about curses, but her answer is simple and brutal. A curse is just something you throw at someone you hate enough to want dead. Hina's plain answer gives Ruel nothing useful, and before he can think any further, exhaustion drags him into a faint sleep. With Ruel asleep, Hina remembers Cassian's order to put him down and finally understands it. Left awake, he would have kept enduring the pain just to think longer. Hina still does not understand why the head of Soteria works this hard when he could have lived comfortably doing nothing, but that strange restlessness is exactly what makes her like him. Ruel wakes in his mansion bed to familiar birdsong and realizes he made it home alive after the collapse. When he calls out, Cassian rises from the shadows and calmly tells him he slept for a day and a half. Ruel is quietly relieved because this recovery was much faster than his earlier 4-day collapse. Cassian says Eris is out training and playing with Leo after whatever he realized on the last mission, and that sounds like good news to Ruel. Ruel brings up curses, and Cassian immediately cuts through the idea by saying a curse without mana is just words. That answer disappoints Ruel, and he admits the overlap between Red Ash and his illness made him start doubting what his sickness really is. Ruel reveals he was healthy until 5 years ago, and even Cassian is surprised because he had never heard that before. Cassian avoids guessing and tells Ruel to wait for the royal doctor and pharmacist arriving that evening instead. Ruel quickly realizes Banios must have sent the medical team before hearing his answer, which makes the prince feel even more prepared than expected. Putting his illness aside for now, Ruel orders Cassian to release the birds and start digging around Banios for hidden ears inside Soteria. He also tells Cassian to identify the doctor and pharmacist before they even arrive, showing he plans to probe the royal side right back. Cassian casually presses a heat patch to Ruel's forehead for the fever, and the cold strategist moment turns unexpectedly warm and playful. When Cassian asks about visiting Liberin, Ruel says Prios comes first because he promised Ketlin a gift and wants to give the family a real chance to change. Ruel adds 2 more names to his plans and asks for paper so he can write letters to Corinth's Lumina and Certes Shio himself. As he writes in beautiful Soteria calligraphy, Ruel is briefly impressed by the body he inherited down to the handwriting. Once Cassian leaves to prepare breakfast and call Tyson, Ruel turns over Banios' offer and starts thinking several moves ahead. He decides Liberin still comes first, but Banios' plan to send him into the Cyronian kingdom makes Ruel start weighing that future mission too. Then he tests himself and forms sky blue mana over his palm, proof that his resistance has grown enough to make magic feel possible again. The old dream of becoming an archmage suddenly feels close enough that Ruel even considers drinking the poison to push his resistance higher. A knock breaks the moment, and Tyson comes in just as Ruel hurriedly pockets the poison. Tyson immediately senses that Ruel's resistance has become stronger, so Ruel bluntly asks if it is enough for him to use magic. That request hits Tyson hard because he still remembers breaking Ruel's weak body with his own hands, and he begs him not to destroy himself now. Ruel answers that once he walked without a cane, he realized how wide the world was, and now he refuses to rely on help for every small thing. Pressed by that resolve, Tyson finally agrees to test him and tells Ruel to show as much mana as he can produce at the limit. Ruel gathers a larger sky blue mana mass over his palm, and Tyson can no longer deny that magic is possible for him now. Even while saying yes, Tyson looks miserable, and Ruel only smiles and asks to learn a few things right away. Tyson pulls out a testing bead and explains that seeing and moving mana is not enough because every mage has different attributes and limits. He adds that Eris can use all 4 elemental attributes, which only makes Ruel more curious about his own result. When Ruel places his hand on the bead, it shows a crude figure, a box, and a shadow hand lifting it from darkness. Ruel is baffled by the strange result, but Tyson is shaken because it means Ruel has the very rare dark attribute. Tyson quickly explains that Ruel did not get some evil black magic, but the rare dark branch called shadow magic, which is only about casting shadows. Because the attribute is so rare, Tyson admits the records are thin and he cannot properly teach it with confidence. Still, Tyson gives him one key idea: darkness is not borrowed from nature like normal magic, it is summoned. Ruel still finds the theory frustratingly abstract, but Tyson's regret gives way to pure wizard curiosity as he promises to help from the side. Ruel plans to spend the next week well, but that hope runs straight into the stern arrival of Banios's royal medical team. The sisters introduce themselves as Friend the doctor and Tiara the pharmacist, both young geniuses sent from the royal side. After examining him, Friend bluntly says Ruel's condition is absolutely stable only in the worst way possible, like walking around with several knives inside his body. When Ruel asks what disease he has, Fran says it is not one disease at all but a bizarre cluster of dozens of different disease patterns packed together. Fran immediately demands painkillers for him, and when Ruel tries to deny the pain, she snaps that she knows he is lying. Ruel can tell Fran is the real deal, and Cassian looks so pleased with her strictness that it almost feels like he found a new ally. Fran admits she cannot promise a cure, but she declares just as firmly that she will treat him because curing the incurable is exactly why she volunteered. Ruel decides not to start this relationship badly, so he obediently takes the medicine right in front of her and warns that he is not usually this easy to manage. Fran lays down a brutal schedule of examinations before every meal and repeats her command for absolute stability before leaving with Cassian. Left behind, Tiara gently explains the medicine bottles by pain level and apologizes for her sister's harsh tone. As soon as the sisters are gone, Leo asks if he is okay, and Ruel admits the medicine works even though the black contamination still feels the same. Instead of resting, Ruel starts practicing Tyson's lesson by feeling his mana spread through his body like blood. His first attempt goes badly because changing the mana's route makes his body flare with knife-like pain, so he adjusts his method and simply follows the natural flow faster instead of forcing it to turn. That finally works, and a tiny separate shadow appears near his feet like the smallest possible proof that his attribute is real. Leo reacts in confusion because he can feel Ruel both in the body and in that little shadow at the same time. Ruel almost pushes too far in excitement, and has to cut the magic immediately when his fragile body gives him that terrifying breaking sensation again. Even after that scare, he is impressed by how quickly he adapted and keeps training until his resistance hits the limit. Leo finally clamps onto his arm and orders him to stop for the day before the filthy energy in this body forces him back into bed. When Ruel asks about Eris, Leo says Eris was muttering about a wall and some hunch he wants to break through. Leo helpfully demonstrates by trying to smash the wall, and Ruel has to grab his tail before his room turns into another disaster. After a light cough with blood at the back of his throat, Ruel takes Tiara's anemia medicine, grabs his cane, and heads out anyway. The servants in the hallway all rush to fuss over him, because after 2 hours of pushing his limit he looks bad enough to worry everyone on sight. Leo bluntly tells him he looks blue today, which confirms just how hard he pushed himself. Ruel still plans another round of hide-and-seek training with Leo because he wants to build not just magic, but a body sturdy enough to support it. When he notices servants secretly following, Ruel stops them gently and asks them to go back to work and keep quiet for his sake. The servants apologize and watch him go anyway, because no matter how calm he acts, their young lord still looks painfully fragile. A week later, Fren examines Ruel again and immediately grows suspicious because his condition is somehow exactly the same. Ruel acts as if he has been resting well, even though he spent the week quietly pushing his shadow magic and slipping around under Cassian's nose. Fran decides she cannot wait any longer and announces that treatment must start now before his condition slips even further. Ruel immediately asks to postpone because he has somewhere to go, and that finally makes Fran explode in disbelief. Ruel cuts her off sharply and reminds her to keep her place, forcing Fran to apologize even while she still argues for his condition. He still refuses to yield, and Cassian steps in to calm Fran by promising he will handle Ruel himself. Before leaving, Fran insists on taking multiple blood samples first, making sure she gets something useful out of this stubborn patient. After Fran leaves, Cassian reveals he has also been watching her and confirms she seems truly obsessed with curing Ruel rather than secretly answering to Banios. Then Ruel's mood turns playful as he asks for the result of the week he gave Cassian to clean up Prios. Cassian says he killed every Prios Baron except Librin, and the survivors who know they are next are now hiding in their mansions. Ruel is openly pleased because removing Librin's Baron allies was the fastest way to clear space for Catelyn to seize control of Prios. Cassian says Catelyn is following orders by stabilizing the region first with soldiers and temporary barons while complaints and bandit trouble are still raging. He also confirms the murders were decorated to look like bandit killings, because Ruel wanted the rats beaten down before cornering their king. Once that report ends, Ruel asks for Estelle to be brought in because he is ready to deal with one of Banios's ears inside his own mansion. Leo perks up, hoping Estelle brought snacks again, only to droop when Ruel says this meeting is business instead. Estelle enters innocently, and Ruel greets her by calmly exposing the truth that she is the prince's planted ear. Estelle bows in shock, but Ruel immediately says he is not throwing her out, and only wants her reports shown to him first. He even brushes past the betrayal by asking if her wish to feed him delicious meat pie was real, catching her completely off guard. Estelle blurts out that spying was just a family job forced on her, but cooking here was the first thing that truly made her happy. Ruel tells her to become his person instead, making it clear he would rather turn Banios' spy than waste someone useful and sincere. Estelle can barely process it because spies usually meet ugly ends, and now the lord she feared most is offering her a place to stay. When she asks if she can really remain here too, Ruel answers in his usual sour way that he does not throw away what he has already picked up. That finally breaks Estelle, and she cries with relief before promising to live up to his expectations in the kitchen. After she leaves, Cassian bluntly calls Ruel too soft for keeping enemy ears around at all. Ruel shoots that down immediately because he is not leaving the prince's network alone, he is planning to steal it. He explains that Banios already lured away the second prince's ear, so he intends to do the same and turn every ear he can, starting with Estelle. Ruel ends the chapter by ordering Dion to start approaching Banios' ears and make them switch sides within half a year. Ruel reads the replies to his secret letters and sees the first opening he wanted. Serdi promises to risk herself to stop her father, while Corinth gives a cautious answer but is still bound to act moderately by oath. Satisfied for now, Ruel hands the letters back and tells Cassian to prepare because he is leaving after the meal. When Leo asks where he is going, Ruel swallows the harsher truth and only says he has someone to meet, and Leo immediately insists on guarding him. Ruel wanted to slip out quietly, but Chainall, Tyson, and Dryanna are already waiting at the main entrance to see him off as if that was never optional. Chainall and Dryanna frame it as duty from their night orders, and Tyson adds that as Ruel's uncle he has every right to stand there too. Tyson leans in with a quiet warning that if Ruel gets into danger, he will kill whoever caused it, and the softness in his smile only makes the threat sharper. Tyson also asks Eris to protect Ruel well, turning the farewell into a direct handoff of responsibility. Ruel notices Eris has grown stronger and taller after finally breaking through his wall, a quiet sign that the boy is not the same escort as before. Inside the carriage, Ruel repeats the question from Eris's first escort day, but this time Eris answers without hesitation that he is not nervous at all. Eris says he is confident he will do better than ever, and Ruel accepts the change with quiet approval. Eris then catches something new in Ruel's body and points out that the amount of mana inside him has increased. Leo almost blurts out that Ruel has been moving strange power and vomiting blood, so Ruel hurriedly clamps his mouth shut. Cassian calmly confirms he already knows Ruel has been moving mana and casting shadow magic, which shocks Eris far more than it shocks him. Eris remembers Tyson's warning that using too much mana could break Ruel's body, and the thought lands on him with real alarm now that he sees it is true. Ruel tries to brush it off with a weak promise to be careful, but both Cassian and Eris instantly wear the same look that says they do not believe him. Cassian needles Eris that a newly learned sword is the most reckless, and Eris straightens up and solemnly promises to do his best anyway. Leo joins in proudly that he will protect Ruel too, and the tense carriage finally loosens into an awkward little teen moment. At Librin's mansion, Ruel arrives with the bait already set and tells the guard he has come over a debt, using the cover story he planted through Catelyn. Instead of waiting comfortably in the carriage, Ruel stays outside in the cold on purpose, knowing that a desperate schemer like Librin will be thrilled to hear he came in person. The plan works immediately, and Librin rushes out himself, overjoyed by what he thinks is a chance to use Ruel. Librin welcomes the Lord of Soteria with fake humility, and Ruel immediately pushes to go inside, already controlling the pace of the meeting. The moment they are in private, Ruel drops the act and bluntly asks whether Librin enjoyed loosing rats onto other people's land and stuffing himself from it. Before Librin can recover, Ruel orders poison forced into him and shows the antidote, making the choice brutally simple: answer questions or die. Librin drops straight into begging for his life, and Ruel answers with a flat rejection that makes it clear mercy is not on offer. Eris backs Ruel's questions with a sharp slap, showing he will play the bad cop without hesitation. Ruel asks Librin about his connection to the Red Ash and immediately cuts off the easy lie about Plane, making it clear he came fully prepared. When Librin still stalls, Eris slaps him again, and the next instant he drives a sword through the back of Librin's hand to force a real answer. Terrified, Librin finally admits Red Ash promised him Prios and backed him with money and people because he always wanted that territory for himself. Ruel presses for the price of that support, and Libran blurts out the real demand. Ruel had to die because some great first step could only begin once he was dead. Ruel asks who stands above Libran, but all he gets is that Libran was only ordered to seize Prios and later target Soteria with drugs. Then Ruel asks about his father's accident 5 years ago, and Libran's terror says he just touched something much deeper. Libran insists he only handled information leaks, then admits Ruel's father discovered Red Ash's identity while evacuating Ruel, and the accident happened before they could come after the child too. That answer makes Ruel realize his long illness may also have started there, so he turns the interrogation toward whether Red Ash planted the sickness in him. Ruel slams the desk and demands the truth about the curse, and Libran breaks completely, shouting that Red Ash did it even though he claims he does not know the exact method. Libran adds one more name before he collapses into begging again. The one who kidnapped Ruel's father was Plain. That only frustrates Ruel more because Plain is already dead, taking a cleaner answer with him. Ruel orders Libran to bring every document he has on Red Ash, deciding that even weak evidence is worth taking now. Libran reveals a hidden passage under his bed and hurries down first, clutching his bleeding hand as he leads them to his secret archive. On the hidden stairs, Libran tries to buy his life by blurting out one more lead. At least one noble outside the barons was also working with Red Ash. As they keep descending, Ruel quietly narrows the suspect list in his head, crossing out the houses he already bound with oaths and can question directly. Libran also reveals that Red Ash serves someone called the Great One, another hidden figure Ruel has never heard named before. When the secret room finally opens, Libran rushes to gather every file he can, but Cassian quietly notes there is probably nothing truly valuable in the pile. Ruel agrees the documents are probably weak, but he still wants them as evidence, and calmly decides Libran himself will be packaged as the bandit leader. At the arranged time, Catelyn arrives at Libran's mansion and publicly accepts the evidence Cassian prepared, neatly exposing Libran as the murderer of the Prios barons. Catelyn thanks Ruel as if words are not enough, and Ruel coolly answers that he only kept his promise and will go no further than this. Instead of accepting grand thanks, Ruel asks Catelyn to quietly send Prios artisans to Soteria and work through the Beto merchant so Soteria's high purity or can be made far more valuable. He pushes further and asks for adventurers, workers, and anyone useful still left in Prios because what Soteria lacks now is not resources, but people. Catelyn admits Prios' real pride is its artisans and says he personally wants Prios to grow closer to Soteria. Ruel answers the goodwill with a reminder that Catelyn's oath still sits in his heart, and Catelyn accepts that leash with bright gratitude instead of resentment. When Ruel asks about Prios backing the second prince, Catelyn says that was Libran's choice, but Ruel immediately tells him not to switch sides openly until he gives the order. Ruel cuts that eagerness short, telling Catelyn not to move until he gives the order, and a sudden cough reminds everyone how bad his health still is. Before leaving, Ruel warns Catelyn to report any approach or mention of Red Ash and to stay close to a reliable escort for a while. Outside, Ruel tells Cassian to leave men behind in case Red Ash tries something, but Eris blurts out that he is more worried about Ruel himself. Ruel stops in with one look, forcing Eris to bow and admit that worrying upward like that was a mistake. Back in the carriage, Ruel sorts through the new pieces in his head: the Great One, the Great First Step, a noble collaborator, his father's accident, and the chance that his illness was planted. The tangle of unknowns bothers him because none of this was ever in the novel he knows, which means the danger around him is wider than expected. Leo starts one of his strange hunger-based lectures about worry, and that sparks a colder thought in Ruel. If Red Ash keeps trying to kill him, then his existence must be extremely important. That realization sends Ruel's thoughts straight to Banyos, because if the prince also talks, Ruel's value in this hidden war could rise even higher. When Eris asks what he is planning now, Ruel bluntly says he was thinking about how to make someone talk, then starts coughing again and finally decides it is time to go home. Back at Soteria, an impeccably groomed old man is already waiting at the entrance, and he introduces himself as Hoswell, butler to the third prince. Hoswell delivers a royal letter saying the prince wants Ruel to serve as the delegation's representative to the Cyronian kingdom, though he is technically free to refuse. Ruel freezes in annoyed disbelief because he never expected the prince to seriously try sending his sick body on foreign delegation work. When Ruel asks whether the prince has forgotten how weak he is, Hoswell calmly explains that the request was pushed not only by his master, but also by Ganian Croft from the Alliance delegation. That name hits Ruel like a spike to the skull, and he visibly staggers from sheer irritation and mounting fever. Ruel steadies himself and asks the departure date anyway, and Hoswell says the delegation leaves from the palace in 2 weeks. Hoswell also makes it clear he was told to bring no further negotiation, only one message from the prince: stay healthy until then. After Hoswell departs, Ruel and Cassian exchange a look that says the prince's butler came with more than a letter, even if none of it was spoken aloud here. Ruel starts walking inside with his cane, and Cassian quietly remarks that Hoswell carries himself like a man who used to be a knight. As they head inside, Leo suddenly cries out, and Ruel stops mid-step, instantly realizing the unstable energy in his body is surging the wrong way again. A wave of heat and stabbing pain tears through his body, and Ruel turns even paler as shivers begin to take him. Cassian moves first, handing Ruel a handkerchief and supporting him while Leo blurts out in guilt that he had not been able to eat enough of the black energy in the carriage. Ruel understands at once that the balance was not maintained, which is why the symptoms returned so fast and so hard. Eris stays calm under pressure and says he will use hold to move Ruel instead of just carrying him, because his worsening condition now needs careful handling. With Cassian ordering careful movement, they begin taking Ruel deeper into the mansion as another dangerous collapse hits right after the prince's summons. Fran rushes into Ruel's room after hearing he vomited blood, and the heavy smell in the air shocks even Tiara when she follows her inside. Cassian snaps at them to shut the door before the whole mansion learns Ruel is in trouble again. Fran checks Ruel calmly and confirms the same thing as always: the bleeding is only a symptom, and Tiara's medicine has already cut the pain. Ruel quietly relaxes because Leo already ate the black residue before Fran arrived, so the ugly blood smell made the scene look worse than it was. When Fran presses him to be more careful, Ruel gives in instead of arguing because he can see how hard she is trying to save him. Fran spots another problem right away and bluntly tells him he caught a cold on top of everything else. Fran insists treatment should begin tomorrow, and Ruel finally yields when he sees the doctor looks even more worn out than he does. After making Ruel promise several times that he will truly rest before leaving again in 2 weeks, Fran finally leaves satisfied. As soon as they are gone, Ruel grumbles that coughing blood is nothing new, but Cassian and even Leo gang up on him for looking like he might die today. Cassian decides the argument is over, tells Ruel to nap until dinner, and treats him like a patient whether he likes it or not. Once outside, Cassian calms the anxious servants gathering in the hall and quietly plans a heavier meat dinner to help Ruel recover. Elsewhere, Hoswell reports to Prince Banios that Ganian was right and Ruel really is too sick for a long journey to Cyronian. Banios admits he feels guilty, because he could have stopped this but let the plan move forward anyway. The prince recalls how tense the royal court turned the moment Ganian named Ruel Soteria as the one to send, because everyone knows Soteria is collapsing and its lord is ill. Even so, Banios starts planning a gift to cool the attention on Soteria, while Hoswell warns that protecting Ruel matters more than easing politics. Because Red Ash is openly targeting Ruel's life, Banios sees the situation clearly now. Once Ruel heads for Cyronian, everything depends on whether they can keep him alive. Back at Soteria, Ruel stares at the royal letter like it is a sentence to pain, because the trip to Cyronian means more than a week of travel in his condition. He forces himself to keep eating anyway, because holding his body together matters more than chasing answers right now. Ruel steadies himself with breath and falls back on his survival rule of balance, deciding to preserve his fragile condition until he can deal with the next Red Ash attack. 2 weeks rush by, and Ruel keeps moving nonstop because he is already planning around the time he will lose in Cyronian. In Tyson's basement, Ruel asks about the warp devices right after treatment, and Tyson is startled to see him walking around so soon. Ruel explains that Fran has already started the new treatment, a long process of killing off the many diseases tangled inside him one by one. Tyson finally shows the breakthrough. A tiny block-shaped device can now hold a real warp open. When Tyson sends fire through the linked warps to prove the transfer works, Ruel knows all he can do now is wait for his uncle to finish the rest. From there, Ruel heads to the training ground, where the newly passed reserve knights are lined up and visibly nervous in front of him. Chainall probably explains that the standards were raised after past failures, but plenty still passed the harder tests. Then Chainall calls forward the top scorer, and Ruel is genuinely shocked to hear it is Eris, a wizard rather than a swordsman. Ruel pins the knight's badge onto Eris himself, honoring the wizard who unexpectedly took first place. Eris answers with blunt sincerity, saying Ruel taught him more than books ever did about anger, shame, pride, protection, and trust. Ruel turns the moment formal and offers a handshake as he welcomes Sir Eris, and Eris immediately vows to protect him from now on. Ruel continues through the ceremony with every new knight, and some of them nearly cry just from shaking his hand. He pushes on through the magic nights and village meetings too, but the moment marriage comes up again he fakes illness and escapes. Back in his room, Ruel barely drops onto the bed before Cassian reminds him that Jairi has already arrived. Ruel coughs, takes the medicine Cassian hands him, and admits he packed his schedule on purpose so he can free up time for training and bigger problems later. Even as he limps to the sofa to meet Jairi, Ruel is already thinking past this visit to missing reports, rising village crime, and the unstable mess left by Plain's disappearance. Jairi arrives looking fatter and thriving, and Ruel immediately teases that he clearly did not come empty-handed. Jairi lays out his gifts: a good sword wrapped in white cloth, fine medicine packed in a luxury box, and a jeweled collar for Leo. When Jairi asks to borrow Ruel's power for the Orboom, Ruel cuts straight to the answer and reveals the workers are already on the way. Ruel pushes the deal even further by adding artisans, crafted goods, and expansion towards Shio and Lumina, leaving Jairi stunned by how much more he is getting. Only after dangling all of that in front of him does Ruel name his real price. He wants his birds planted throughout Jairi's peddler network so he can hear far more than one merchant's secrets. Jairi also confirms he heard about the Cyronian trip and promises unconditional help, though Ruel laughs at how much the merchant now sounds like he is trying to win him over. Ruel has Cassian call in one of his birds, and Jairi turns in surprise when the operative steps through the door. Ruo gives one of his birds a long-term covert mission to join Beto's merchants and gather every red ash rumor he can, with Jairi promising support. After sending them off, Ruel drops back onto the bed under the weight of simple exhaustion, not a fresh collapse. Before Fran gives the next dose, Ruel cools the apple tea enough to share half a cup with Leo, then sits through another side effect check and medicine round. Once the medicine is safely in, Ruel goes right back to his desk and attacks the paperwork with snacks in one hand and a pen in the other. He means to rest only briefly after lunch, but instead falls asleep face down on the desk and wakes up drooling 2 hours later at dusk. Cassian tells him he let him sleep because real rest has been rare lately, but Ruel only looks at the fresh wave of documents and refuses to leave them for tomorrow. After checking that the new medicine left no dizziness or nausea, Cassian gives one last warning not to move Mana too much or sneak out before the long trip. Instead of arguing further, Ruel tells Cassian to take the rap sword before he leaves, and the gift instantly wipes the stress off Cassian's face. Alone again with paperwork, Ruel gets blindsided when Leo asks the simplest question in the room: does he not know how to rest? Ruel admits he cannot stop because he feels like the moving cog in the middle, and if he rests, too much around him stops with him. When Leo asks if that means Ruel is happy, the question lands hard enough to stop his hand again. After thinking through all the pain he lives with, Ruel still answers that yes, he is happy. Leo beams at that answer and says he is always happy too because Ruel is happy. Ruel follows the mood and puts Jairi's green jeweled necklace on Leo, who immediately loves the idea of shining. At dinner, Leo suddenly starts asking everyone in the room whether they are happy, beginning with Eris. Eris and Tyson answer easily that they are happy, but Cassian nearly trips the mood by asking what if he is not. Cassian quickly gives in and says he is happy too before Leo decides he needs happiness lessons. Leo proudly concludes that Ruel made everyone happy, and the absurdly sincere statement makes Ruel choke on his food while the others mostly look like they agree. The day before leaving for the royal palace, Ruel forces Eris to keep blasting his shield training until the barrier lasts a little longer, but 12 seconds still feels pathetic to him. Ruel had even considered poisoning himself to build resistance faster, but Tyson stopped that, so now he is taking the slower route and letting Eris hammer him with magic instead. When shield practice ends, Ruel grimly switches to running, and Leo instantly perks up like this is the real event. Ruel gulps down Jairi's expensive powder and several medicines just to stand properly, and only then does the nausea ease enough for him to move. The household knights cheer as Ruel gets up to run, turning his painful training into something the whole estate is quietly rooting for. Eris says the knights respect him, but Ruel brushes it off and starts to run anyway, focused on surviving the palace trip more than enjoying anyone's praise. He runs with breath in his system until his chest burns and blood rises in his throat, because rebuilding his body is the only way he can keep going. Fran's medicine is helping without nasty aftereffects, so even Cassian's worries cannot stop Ruel from pushing both his endurance and resistance a little further each day. After finishing the race, Ruel has to lean on Eris all the way back to his room, showing exactly how hard he pushed himself. Even after a bath and food, Ruel goes straight back to resistance training, refusing to waste the little progress he has made. Leo rushes to the marked circle for their next game, while Ruel pulls out his tiny shadow and starts stretching it longer with careful control. When Ruel removes Ganian's bracelet, the shadow grows much farther at once, proving how much the resistance burden has been limiting him. Cassian is startled by the growth, and Eris proudly points out that Ruel earned it through constant brutal practice. The rules are simple. If Ruel can trap Leo inside the circle before he hits his limit, he wins for once. Ruel starts confidently by shaping the shadow into a hand, but Leo's short-legged zigzags make the first grab miss cleanly. Realizing standard control will never catch Leo, Ruel tries something new and splits his shadow for the first time. That breakthrough does not stop there, because Ruel calls out a third shadow and proves his power is no longer tied to one fixed form or count. Then Ruel does the real trick and pulls a fresh shadow up from Leo's own shadow, finally stealing the opening he needs. The surprise works, and Ruel grabs Leo by the tail at last, earning his first real win in their training game. But the win costs him immediately, because the extra shadows throw Ruel's mana out of balance and blood spills through the hand clamped over his mouth while Eris and Cassian rush in. Leo tries to pounce on him in protest, but Cassian blocks the spirit beast while Eris panics over Ruel's unstable mana. Even while his resistance power screams and his body feels ready to fall apart, Ruel decides the collapse was worth it because both of his powers have clearly grown. When he opens his eyes again, Ruel is no longer at Soteria but in Prince Banios's room at the royal palace. Banios casually explains that Ruel arrived unconscious, missed the planned timing, and ended up borrowing the prince's room until he woke up. After Banios leaves, Cassian admits that Ruel never woke up in time, so Tyson had to use space movement magic to force the trip to the palace. Tyson scolds him for being reckless even with resistance, but Ruel is more worried that his uncle spent dangerous magic on his behalf. Tyson is not as drained as Ruel feared, but he still panics for forgetting to call a doctor first instead of rushing over himself. Ruel calms him down by saying he only overused mana and did not actually break his recovery limit, which to Ruel counts as a good result. Tyson still wants to follow the journey, yet Ruel gently refuses because his uncle has more important work to handle. When Tyson keeps piling on worried warnings, Ruel deliberately turns the guilt back on him and says all this concern only makes him feel like a burden stabbing his uncle in the chest. That finally makes Tyson retreat in a hurry, and the moment the door closes, Ruel drops the act and shows how exhausted he really is. Cassian reveals that Ganian is with the others and had to be physically kept from barging in, so Ruel decides it is time to get dressed and move. After checking himself, Ruel realizes both his recovery power and resistance power improved from the collapse, so he calls the result refreshing instead of disastrous. Once changed and medicated again, Ruel calls in Ganian, Eris, and Leo to settle the fallout from the reckless training. Ganian awkwardly apologizes for helping with training despite knowing Ruel's condition, and Ruel needles him for still having a conscience left. Ruel says he is collecting debts he cannot repay yet, then notices Eris is still visibly shaken and tells him to pull himself together. Ganian brings up the bigger danger at last. Red Ash is after Ruel, and even after searching his family records he found no clear reason why. Ruel answers by giving Ganian a job he cannot do himself. Once back in Cyronian, Ganian must lead the Blue Knights, smash the hideout, and leave survivors for questioning. Ganian accepts immediately and admits he wants answers too, especially why Red Ash has marked Ruel in the first place. Before they can go further, Banio strolls into his own room without knocking and finds the whole group gathered there. Banio says he wants to make up for the disturbance and offers Ruel a gift, then pulls out a bottle that makes both Cassian and Ganian immediately tense. Banio insists the bottle is safer than it looks, and once Ruel realizes what scheme the prince is building, he decides to go along with it. At the royal audience, Ruel enters with a cane and a calm face, drawing every eye in the chamber even as his sick body makes him look pitiful. He greets the king properly, but a violent coughing fit interrupts the moment, and reminds everyone just how weak he still looks. Even so, Ruel tells the king he will accept the delegation for the country's sake, and the king officially appoints him as Laponia's representative. Ruel remembers that Banios vouched for the king's love of Laponia, and that private trust lets him commit fully to the dangerous performance they planned. At his feet, Leo waits for the signal like a tiny accomplice, ready to strip away the black substance at exactly the right moment. The instant Ruel stumbles forward to take the letter, the black layer is torn away and he vomits black blood across the chamber. Instead of collapsing in disgrace, Ruel stays on one knee, receives the letter, and bows deeply to the king through the pain. The king forgets the script for a second and rushes to call a doctor, genuinely shaken by how ruined Ruel's body looks up close. Ruel stops him from coming closer, because the act has already done its job and any more would ruin the balance they needed. After meeting Ganian's eyes, the king gives in and orders Sir Croft to take Ruel out instead. Ganian scoops Ruel up and carries him from the hall, leaving the court staring at the black blood stains and the wrecked image of Satyria's last heir. The moment he is gone, the ministers begin pressing the king to replace him as delegation representative because no one believes Ruel can survive the role. The king refuses every request and insists his choice stands, because replacing Ruel now would humiliate Satyria and damage the house beyond repair. Even knowing the scene was partly staged, the king is still left brooding over one ugly truth: Satyria's heir is in far worse condition than he imagined. Back with his people, Ruel shrugs off their worried stares and immediately asks when departure is, treating the whole court disaster like one completed move. Cassian says the trip was delayed until 2 in the afternoon, which gives Ruel exactly what he wanted: time for rumors of his condition to spread before Red Ash reacts. Eris carefully asks if this play was also meant to bait Red Ash, and Ruel confirms that he is trying to force their next move under better conditions. Ruel explains the gamble plainly: if Red Ash panics, they move too fast and expose themselves, but if they wait, he may finally learn what his disease is and where it came from. Looking at the people around him, Ruel quietly takes comfort in one practical fact: with this group beside him, he probably will not die that easily. Ruel says it plainly: Red Ash wants him gone, so everyone needs to protect him because he intends to live a long time. Eris vows to protect him. Leo calls Ruel his source of food and happiness, and Ganian laughs because the line somehow sounds both ridiculous and exactly like Ruel. Cassian adds one more warning that some royal knights may also belong to Red Ash, so Ruel ends the talk by telling everyone to trust each other and stay sharp. Thanks to the king, the group leaves in a large carriage with enough space for Ruel to lie down and keep playing the role of a dangerously ill delegate. Leo approves of the carriage like a bed on wheels, but Cassian is still irritated by the absurdity of making a truly sick man pretend to be even sicker. When Cassian notices Ruel still does not feel warm despite the heated carriage, his concern jumps again and he regrets not dragging Fran along. Then Banios boards the carriage in secret to check on him. Taking advantage of the soundproof interior he picked himself, Banios quietly asks if the blood was real, and Ruel answers with a dry smile that fake blood is not exactly easy to produce. Because the prince's bottle got used in that performance, Banios offers compensation, and Ruel immediately asks for support that reaches far beyond one favor. Ruel says that at 17 he is already looking toward next year's coming-of-age ceremony and a formal Lord inauguration backed openly by Banios. He pushes further and asks Banios to help bring down the second prince, restore Satyria's proper subsidies, and fund a large ceremony strong enough to display their alliance. Ruel also slips in a request for a famous sword and a practical sword, which instantly gets a pleased reaction out of Cassian. Banios is still unsatisfied because every request so far benefits Satyria more than Ruel himself, so he presses him to ask for something personal. After a pause, Ruel awkwardly asks for nothing grander than a pen that will not dry out, which leaves Banios dumbfounded by how little he asks for himself. Before leaving, Banios gets distracted petting Leo's tail, and the spirit beast complains loudly while obviously enjoying the attention. Then Banios drops the real warning: Ruel cannot trust the royal knights either, because some were planted by the second prince. Once he leaves, Ruel finds papers where Banios had been sitting, and the marked knight profiles confirm exactly who might be enemy plants. Ruel hands the list to Cassian for sorting friend from enemy, then lets himself be buried under more blankets because he still cannot hold warmth properly. Cassian finally solves the problem in the simplest way possible by dropping warm little Leo beside him like a living heater, and only then does Ruel relax enough to sleep. Near sunset, a violent jolt jerks Ruel awake when the carriage suddenly lurches on the road. Cassian tries to soothe him and says something seems to be stuck outside, but the interruption is strange enough that Ruel sits up anyway. Eris comes down from the front and reports that overnight rain left the road muddy and the carriage is trapped in a deep puddle. That answer bothers Ruel immediately, because this is the main road from Shio towards Satyria and it should have been maintained far better than this. Already hating how off-plan this feels, Ruel orders Cassian to check the situation outside, ending the excerpt on a fresh note of suspicion. On the road, Cassian stops over what looks like an ordinary puddle because Ruel's instincts keep warning him. After touching the soil with his bare hand, Cassian confirms the puddle was dug by someone a few hours earlier, with no trap or mana on it. Cassian tells Eris this is psychological warfare, not an attack, and warns him to keep driving while treating every puddle ahead as bait. A royal knight commander comes over to ask why they stopped, and Cassian coolly calls it a carriage issue so the escort can keep moving. Back inside, Cassian reports that the fake puddle was a warning that the enemy could strike anytime, but Ruel only smirks and refuses to get rattled. The harassment keeps going all the way to the gate, with masked attackers appearing just long enough to loose a few arrows and keep the whole escort irritated. When the carriage pauses at the gate, Ruel steps out for air and finally sees the point. The knights are already exhausted, filthy, and fraying from constant nuisance attacks. Ruel realizes the enemy wants the escort mentally worn down before they enter Masu Forest, where sudden monster attacks would turn that irritation into chaos. Back inside the carriage, Ruel spells out how worn-down knights and surprise monsters could turn the road to Cyronian into a war zone, then decides to use his power first. The moment the carriage enters Masu Forest and the hidden monsters get ready to surge out, Ruel speaks into the trees before they can move. With green light rising in his eyes, Ruel orders every monster not to come out until he passes, and the sheer scale of the command hits him at once with a nosebleed and a ringing forest. Hundreds of answering voices crash into Ruel's head at the same time, and he blacks out under the weight of his own power. Elsewhere, an enraged man learns Ruel entered the neutral zone anyway and kills the reporting subordinate on the spot. A calm woman cuts in, says she will handle tonight's next move, and sinks into the floor after declaring everything is for him. That night, Ruel wakes in the lodging with a hoarse voice and no idea how long he was out. Cassian throws a bound assassin onto the floor and tells the startled Ruel that Hina caught her aiming straight for his neck. Ganian barges in with his sword already out, ready to kill the intruder, while Eris arrives a beat later upset that he noticed too late. Ruel keeps his head and has Hina use confession pills on the captive instead of waiting for a voluntary confession. Under the confession pill, the assassin admits she is Red Ash, names a colleague called Nintra, and says another attack is already planned on the road to Cyronian. When Hina presses for the truth about Ruel's illness, the assassin resists for a moment, so Hina forces in a second confession pill. The answer is worse than expected. The woman calls Ruel's disease a punishment from him, then starts dying under what looks like a mana oath backlash. Still cursing Ruel and insisting his illness will never heal, the dying assassin is cut off when Ruel orders Hina to end it. Ruel says he has heard curses like that before, then turns from the corpse and asks Cassian the practical question of how strong this assassin actually was. Cassian judges she was not among the weakest, and Ruel immediately reads the attack for what it is, a dummy sent alone to measure their strength. To mislead the hidden enemy, Ruel orders Cassian to quietly bring in the one royal knight he has vetted as trustworthy. Ruel also tells Ganian and Eris to sneak back to their rooms unseen, then return making as much noise as possible so the scene looks natural. Ruel warns Ganian that the knights may be compromised all the way through, and Red Ash may have infiltrated deeper than any of them realize. After they slip out under concealment magic, Ruel notices Leo sleeping through all of it, and almost envies how peacefully the spirit can rest. Cassian returns with the one knight he trusts to use, and the young royal knight freezes in shame when he sees an intruder reach Ruel's room. Ruel cuts off the knight's panic and tells him the truth they have to work from now on. Someone inside the knights helped the intruder. Ruel says this knight is the only one he can trust here and orders him to suspect everyone, even his commander and closest comrades. The knight hesitates between trust in his unit and loyalty to the kingdom, and Ruel presses him to choose the country over comfort and old assumptions. The reminder that Ruel is going to Cyronian as the kingdom's trusted representative finally breaks the knight's hesitation, and he commits himself on the spot. Ruel starts the trap immediately, ordering the knight to raise the alarm as if the intruder has just been found. Ginger bellows about an intruder, and even Leo jolts awake before Ruel gently pets him back to sleep in the middle of the fake crisis. Right on cue, Ganian and Eris crash and loudly pretending they just discovered the danger, even though both are obviously acting a little too hard. The commander and other knights rush in, find Ruel pale and coughing, and immediately treat it as a near disaster. The commander swears they will kill the intruder and rushes out, while Ruel realizes with disbelief that this overacting may start an even worse rumor about his health. Once the room clears, Cassian confirms the fake intruder scene was planted properly, which should keep the traitor cautious and stop any second attempt tonight. Because the attack was staged as ongoing danger, Ruel makes Ganian and Eris stay in his room for the night, then refuses to let Eris sleep on the bare cold floor without a blanket. After the neutral zone, the road north opens onto a cold sea, and Ruel smiles at the sight even as winter bites harder around the carriage. Ruel tries to crack the window for the wind, but Cassian stops him at once because the trip has already pushed his fever up. Leo hangs from the window, thrilled by the ocean and begging to jump in, only to cheerfully remind Ruel that the one who gets sick every day is him. Cassian explains they are still days away because the bridge to Cyronian can sink under the waves depending on the sea, which instantly gives Ruel another bad feeling. At the bridge entrance, Ganian reports that Cyronian wizards are freezing the waves for the crossing, but hearing that from Ganian only makes Ruel more certain something will go wrong. Before they start, Ruel calls in Eris and Leo because if the sea itself is used against them, those are the two he trusts to stop it. Ruel tells Eris and Leo he expects trouble on the bridge and asks if they can suppress the waves together if an attack comes. He makes his distrust explicit too, saying he does not trust Cyronian's wizards at all, and wants Cassian to deal with any of them who interfere. The carriage finally rolls onto the bridge, and the first violent shaking hits Ruel hard enough to turn his face pale with motion sickness. When Ruel looks outside, he sees just how exposed they are, a huge 6-lane bridge over frozen sea with tense knights riding guard on every side. To distract himself halfway across, Ruel opens a communicator with Billow and checks on the mansion's defenses and ongoing projects. Billow reports progress on training and devices, but the real blow is that Red Ash also tried to infiltrate the Soteria mansion while Ruel was away. Ruel reads that attack as more pressure than a real breakthrough, and orders more patrols anyway before ending the call. The bridge starts shaking less, but before anyone can relax, Cassian abruptly opens the carriage door and decides the threat is coming from underneath. Cassian lifts Ruel out himself rather than trust the carriage to survive, and Ganian comes running with his sword already drawn. Ruel shoves Leo toward Eris and reminds both of them this is the moment they prepared for. Eris and Leo break away to handle the sea itself, fully committed to proving Ruel right for trusting them over the local wizards. A heartbeat later, the real ambush erupts as a huge column of water blasts up from beneath the carriage, and a white-clad enemy appears inside the surge. Cassian slips clear with Ruel in his arms, and even in the middle of the attack Ruel grimly notes that the reinforced carriage still has not broken. Then Hina whispers from behind that she already cut down 2 of the enemy hidden among Cyronian's wizards before vanishing back into the shadows. Shivering from fever and the sea wind, Ruel clings to Cassian as the bridge ambush erupts and the knights finally rush to protect him. As nervous knights moved toward Ruel on the shattered bridge, Ganian stepped in front of them and blocked the approach because he still suspected Red Ash agents were mixed in. The knight commander swallowed Ganian's pressure, accepted the warning, and turned his men into one force with a harsh order to annihilate the enemy. Ruel took in the wreckage around him, noticed Eris with Leo nearby, and finally got Cassian to set him down by showing the necklace Tyson had given him. The instant Ruel touched the ground, Cassian casually kicked away a hidden threat and slipped into the shadows to clean up the area himself. Ganian stayed glued to Ruel's side, cutting down anyone who came close while Ruel quietly admitted he was freezing in the blood-soaked sea wind. Too cold to endure it, Ruel poured mana into his ring and called Tyson under the excuse that he just wanted warmth, not help. Tyson answered through the ring at once, and instead of a simple warm spell he sent fierce blue flames that wrapped around Ruel like living heat. Ganian felt the change immediately and muttered that Tyson's mana quality had become far stronger than before. Ruel kept his eyes on the sea instead of the skirmish, because he knew the enemies were stalling for the real attack. Then Ganian sensed it too. Giant waves were rushing in from both sides of the bridge, and the enemy finally pulled back now that their trap had arrived. Ganian shouted that he would cut one wave himself, and his sword aura thickened into something heavy enough to make even Ruel feel sick. Cassian reappeared from Ruel's shadow and asked him to turn off Tyson's flame, because he was about to move others into position. Once the fire vanished and the cold slammed back into him, Ruel gave quick orders. Eris would take the right wave, and Cassian would bring the commander in to handle the middle. Eris accepted the chance without hesitation, because this was the moment he had trained for with Leo, to put mana on a sword and cut something impossible. The knight commander rushed over to tell Ruel to take refuge, But Ruel shut that down with a dry question. How was someone who could barely run supposed to escape a wave? Put in his place, the commander bowed, accepted the order to protect Ruel instead, and drew his aura-coated sword while Cassian draped a blanket over Ruel. Ruel decided that was enough. The commander might not be impressive, but at least he was clearly not one of Red Ash. Cassian realized Ruel had deliberately stayed for this danger, because he wanted everyone to see how far Eris had grown beside monsters like Ganian and the Royal Commander. Ganian struck first and tore into one wave with a beast-like slash of blue aura. At the same time, the Royal Knight Commander suppressed the middle section, holding back the flooding gap with his own aura. Then Leo breathed onto Eris's blade, and the small flame on the sword swelled into hungry blue fire. Eris opened his eyes, twisted through the swing with everything he had, and sent blue fire straight through the wave. The wave did not just split, it boiled away in a violent hiss, and the whole bridge turned to stare at Eris in shock. Eris looked back at Ruel for approval, and only after seeing Ruel's smile did he finally lower the sword with shaking arms. Ganian quietly bragged that Eris was his student, but Ruel was already focused on the stunned knights because this was exactly the reputation-building moment he wanted. As Eris staggered back with Leo in his arms, the knights struggled to name what they had just seen and finally landed on one answer: Magic Swordsman. Ruel liked the sound of that title immediately, because it meant Eris had just claimed the spotlight over both commanders in front of everyone. To make the connection unmistakable, Ruel praised Eris in front of the whole bridge and patted his shoulder like a lord presenting his own escort. That broke Eris emotionally. Exhausted and shaking from drained mana, he thanked Ruel with complete sincerity for giving him the strength he never could have reached alone. When Ruel told him plainly that he really had become strong, Eris nearly burst into tears on the spot. Ruel quietly told Eris not to collapse here, but to lift his head, face the crowd proudly, and keep following him. With the danger past, Ruel pointed out the overturned carriage and the dazed knights finally snapped back to work. The Royal Knight Commander praised Eris to Ruel directly, admitting the boy's future looked frighteningly bright. Then Ganian turned the shared battle into a friendly challenge, promising the Royal Knight Commander they would cross swords properly another time. Ruel stopped Ganian before he basked in it for long, and quietly sent him back to work by revealing that Red Ash had been mixed among the wizards. Ganian turned away at once to handle the infiltrators, while Ruel left the aftermath to him and started shivering again the moment the wind hit. Cassian inspected the carriage, declared it still usable except for a few scratches, and pushed everyone to get moving again. Ruel ordered Eris into the carriage instead of onto the driver's seat, because the wave-cutting attack had drained him too badly to handle the reins. After the carriage rolled out, Eris's earlier heroics vanished and he nervously worried about leaving sickly Ruel without Cassian beside him. Ruel told Eris to stop worrying and rest, and under that calm pressure Eris grudgingly lay down, suddenly understanding Cassian a little better. When Eris asked what Ruel actually wanted besides Soteria, Ruel answered without hesitation: a rich, comfortable, peaceful life where he did not have to stand in the center. Eris accepted that answer with a laugh, but once he drifted off, Ruel lay back and bitterly blamed Red Ash for twisting his simple dream into this mess again. By the end of the night, the carriage stopped at a tiny outer village of Cyronian, and Ruel knew they had finally reached the place tied to another hero's hidden power. Ruel planned to talk to Cassian before slipping away to the cave, but the weather solved the excuse for him when sharp cold wind hit and snow started coming down hard. By morning the snowfall had buried the village so deeply that Ruel barely recognized the ground outside his window. Cassian came in and warned that Ruel still had a fever, but Ruel was secretly thrilled because the heavy snow made it natural for the group to stay one more day. Ruel immediately used that chance to announce he needed to go out, because the power in his body was humming like he had just found a friend nearby. Cassian tried to stop him, but Ruel argued that an unknown power that was clearly helping him was too valuable to ignore now. Leo tried to join at once, but Ruel told him to stay behind and guard the warm bed, which instantly turned the little purifier into a bundle of wounded feelings. Ruel calmed Leo by reminding him that he named him and did not throw away things he picked up, and that was enough to melt the dragon's panic on the spot. Cassian, already worried about breakfast and Ruel's fragile health, finally gave in and told him to just take Leo along if that would stop the scene. To keep the outing hidden, Ruel called for Eris and ordered him to block anyone from entering and make excuses if Ganian showed up. Eris did not press for details at all. He simply trusted that whatever Ruel was going to collect must be something important, and wished him a safe return. Cassian bundled Ruel into so many layers for the trip that even moving his arms became awkward, but at least the cold stopped biting through. Then Cassian carried Ruel out across the snow at terrifying speed, moving so fast it felt like the world itself was skipping under them. Watching that mobility in action, Ruel could only think again what a monster Cassian really was, far beyond the version he remembered from the novel. Their talk turned dark when Ruel asked if Cassian could kill a king, and Cassian answered that he could but only accepted deaths he judged deserved and safe to carry out. Cassian even admitted he once considered killing the king when he was younger and drunk, which left Ruel silently deciding this man was completely insane. At last the powers inside Ruel pulled strongly in one direction, and he pointed Cassian toward a cave ahead in the snowy terrain. The moment they reached the spot, Ruel knew this was it, so he had Cassian set him down, handed Leo over, and told them both to wait while he went in alone. Ruel enters the third trial expecting another easy win, but the sight of the doppelganger's cave wipes that confidence away. The cave immediately throws his own face and voice at him, accusing him of being selfish and dragging other people into danger for his sake. Ruel keeps moving, but the illusion keeps digging into every private fear he hides, from his sick body to the harm his existence might bring to towns and allies. He answers the mental assault by drawing a steady breath and forcing himself onward, refusing to let the trial's illusions control his pace. Then the cave changes tactics and shows him Kim Han, the life he had before this world, finally shaking Ruel hard enough to stop his feet. Kim Han's fake voice presses even deeper, asking why he is not terrified of being trapped in a novel with no known ending. Ruel only falters for a moment before rejecting the trap outright and walking past with a rude gesture, treating that old self as something already dead and useless. At the end, Ruel reaches a fractured sculpture and claims the trial on his own terms, snapping back that he chose this power, not the other way around. The sculpture's fragments sink into his body, and recovery and resistance cry out like they are welcoming a third power. Ruel realizes he has gained the power of reflection, and instead of using it like Ganian's shield, he immediately sees a smarter use for his ruined body. He thinks of his body like a broken pipe and decides reflection can help push outside mana back out, patching one of the worst reasons he keeps collapsing. The new power already helps, but not cleanly. Ruel spits blood, grins through it, and decides he can finally chase his seventh goal of living for himself by enduring mana. Just as he turns to leave, a new message appears in raw mana telling him to stop gaining more power. Ruel calls Cassian out of his shadow, and Cassian instantly realizes the one presence he failed to notice before was something terrifyingly skilled. Ruel brings out Leo to track the rider, and the spirit complains about being left alone before catching a scent that feels human but strangely close to nature. Leo follows the scent outside, but it cuts off in the forest, where another mana message warns Ruel to stay with the Great Purifier and stop taking more of the hero's power. The warning leaves Ruel with a pounding head, because whoever wrote it knew both Leo's true role and the exact secret of the powers inside him. Elsewhere, an unknown man checks 2 circular tattoos left on his body and notes that another one has vanished. Later, back at their lodging, Cassian quietly offers Ruel hot water and admits his own shame for failing to catch the intruder. Ruel answers bluntly that he needs to know whether the Hidden Watcher is an enemy or ally, because if even Cassian cannot protect him, his life is already hanging by a thread. Trying to make sense of the warning, Ruel asks Leo what close to nature means, and Leo says the scent felt like a human already nearing a spirit's return to nature, which for spirits means death. Leo cannot explain exactly what the person is, but he insists the stranger is not outside nature's order, which at least means not something he is meant to purify. When Ruel presses about beings outside natural order, Leo awkwardly admits he only knows he should recognize them on sight, then panics because his half-awake state means he might fail if one really appears. Ruel drops the question for now, deciding there is no point overthinking a warning from someone who still refuses to show himself. Instead, he reveals the new power to Cassian by asking him to toss a fork, and a brief powder-like barrier knocks it away before it can touch him. Cassian immediately sees that this is not normal magic, and Ruel explains he plans to use reflection to patch his body's mana weakness instead of standing behind it like a shield. Cassian approves the idea and congratulates him, and Ruel, pleased with himself, pushes to begin proper testing after the meal. When the real test starts, Cassian's fist bounces off the new power, but the effort still turns Ruel pale enough to cough blood. The result stings even more because Ganian once mastered this power instantly, while Ruel's damaged body is clearly holding it back from the start. Cassian helps him to bed and says he will call Eris later, while Leo leans in and asks if there is anything he can do. Ruel tells Leo not today, and the spirit promises to help whenever he is needed, softening the room for a moment. That quiet breaks when Ganian barges in without knocking, and Ruel finally snaps that he should learn some manners. Ganian ignores the complaint and brings serious news. The Blue Knights will meet them in the next town because the king now treats Ruel as a precious diplomatic guest. He adds that Red Ash vanished on the way and some wizards were mixed in with them, so he called in the Blue Knights because he needs people he can trust inside the palace. Then a retainer enters with a note taken from a bird, and the room tightens when the intercepted message turns out to be an assassination order. The note names Ganian, Commander Tordo, and Eris as the first people to eliminate, confirming enemy agents are already moving under the cover of heavy snow. The shaken retainer reports 4 traitor names, and Ruel immediately steadies him by saying Torto is not one of them, and the real enemy has finally arrived. As soon as Ginger leaves to warn Torto, Ruel decides not to wait for the attack and asks Cassian if they should start reducing the number of enemy heads first. Cassian accepts at once, and the exchange with Ganian's sword hand makes it clear the killers are about to move under Ruel's orders. Ruel also sends Hina to evacuate the villagers, using Ganian's name if needed to make sure the warning is obeyed fast. To speed up reinforcements, Ruel orders Leo to melt the snow, and the spirit dives out the window into the drifts like a fish entering water. With the road being cleared and the shadows already hunting the enemy leader, Ruel settles into his plan and waits to see which fool will end up under his feet first. Eris arrives after Cassian's summons, and Ruel calmly assigns him the simplest and hardest job: protect both him and Ganian while the knights secure the town. On the enemy side, Nitra marches toward the southern village half panicked, haunted by Mary's death and by the fear that all their information about Ruel was wrong. He keeps taking out and putting away a bottle of black liquid, trying to convince himself that this one item from his superiors is enough to make the operation work. That confidence dies the instant Cassian appears in front of him without a sound and casually asks if his name is Nitra. Before Nitra can even react, Cassian has already taken the black bottle from his hand and identified it as the core of whatever operation they plan to launch. Nitra tries to draw his sword, but Cassian's killing pressure is so absolute that his body locks up before he can swing. As Nitra buckles to his knees, the heads of the men behind him suddenly fly off, and one rolls right to his feet before he fully understands they are already dead. Terrified into total submission, Nitra nods through Cassian's questions, and Cassian dismisses the whole plan as pathetic before smashing his face and lifting him by the throat. In the interrogation room, Ruel sits calmly tapping his knee while captured Nitra kneels at his feet, already shocked that someone this physically weak crushed his side so fast. Cassian forces an answer out of him, and Nitra finally admits that he is Nitra. Ruel ignores the disrespect and asks the real question instead: how much can Nitra reveal before his mana oath punishes him? Nitra says he would rather die than answer, so Ruel quietly uses breath and starts needling him about why their side keeps hunting him. Provoked by Ruel's needling, Nitra finally blurts out that Ruel's existence is blocking the Great One's great step. Ruel steps down and mocks that so-called Great One as a coward who still has not beaten him in person, and Nitra's devotion instantly flares into anger. When Ruel sarcastically asks whether the Great One is too sick to come himself, Nitra snaps back that what is inside Ruel is not illness but his mark. Ruel acts startled and presses further, getting Nitra to confirm that the mark lets that enemy keep track of him wherever he goes. Ruel points out that a mere tracking mark should not be tearing his body apart, and that opening makes Nitra boast that the Great One's punishment was supposed to kill him. Enjoying Ruel's apparent fear, Nitra gleefully reveals the punishment is a curse that makes him feel stabbed all over, pile up diseases, vomit blood, and die miserably. Inside, Ruel is relieved because Fran's diagnosis was right after all. The nightmare in his body is a curse, not some unknown disease. Now that he has the truth, Ruel drops the act and asks who actually placed the curse mark on him if the Great One could not come in person. Pinned under the murderous pressure in that room, Nitra trembles and blurts out that it was the head of Laponia. The answer does not trigger a normal mana oath penalty, and instead black blood suddenly starts pouring from Nitra's eyes. Ganian shoves Ruel back just before black energy erupts from Nitra and blasts through the room. Ganian clears the black energy with a single sword swing, and Cassian instantly dives through the broken wall to chase the escaping Nitra. Ganian follows after Cassian, leaving Eris behind to guard Ruel in the wrecked room. Watching the black-blooded Nitra flee, Ruel feels something hotter than fear rise in his body, like his blood and mana are demanding that he erase it. Eris warns that chasing now is too dangerous, but Ruel stands up with the same unsettling authority he once used on monsters and turns it into an order. Eris bows and gives in, and Ruel also warns the hidden Hina not to try stopping him. Outside in the village, transformed Nitra lurches through collapsing buildings covered head to toe in black blood, and every step stains the ground black. Torto reacts fast, ordering the villagers protected and the knights to attack the strange creature. Nitra lashes out with a thick black stream, and the knights' raised shields start melting the instant they block it. The melting defense gives way at once, and men behind the shields die before they can even scream. Ganian shouts for everyone to get back and cuts Nitra's head off in one clean strike, only to discover that decapitation does not kill him. Cassian joins in from the shadows and slices the throat again with a razor-thin purple aura, but even that only slows the regeneration. Even Cassian is left staring in disgust because this enemy simply refuses to die. Leo charges in and proves his touch can melt the black blood, but he is visibly uneasy about what he is dealing with. When Ruel arrives, Leo rushes to him and admits this creature is outside nature's order and beyond his own ability to purify. Cassian and Ganian both try to stop him, but Ruel keeps walking straight toward the monster anyway. Nitra instantly lunges at Ruel, but Eris throws up a shield and blocks the strike at the last second. Eris follows with red butterfly-like flames of purification, but they only slow the creature down instead of stopping it. As Eris keeps the monster occupied, the mana around Ruel shifts again, and the stronger darkness in him makes nearby eyes turn his way. Black hands surge up from the surrounding shadows and clamp onto Nitra from every side, all moving under Ruel's command. Ruel gives a single command to sleep, and the black blood starts getting dragged into his shadow in a scene so eerie it almost looks sacred. Leo blurts out the impossible thought on everyone's mind: was that purification, and is Ruel some kind of great purifier? As soon as Nitra collapses, Ruel coughs up a heavy gush of blood, far worse than usual. That gush of blood snaps everyone out of the shock, and Cassian rushes in to cover Ruel's mouth as the cost of that purification becomes impossible to ignore. Later, Ruel lies curled up in bed burning with fever while his recovery and resistance powers strain so hard they almost sound like they are crying out. At Ruel's bedside, Leo says the black thing has to be eaten away, and Ganian's look inside Ruel confirms the diseases in him are rampaging out of control. Leo starts tearing the black remnants out of Ruel's body and, to his own surprise, blurts out that the foul thing tastes delicious. Eris offers breath to help, but Cassian shuts that hope down immediately because nothing is working well enough. With the pain still raging, Cassian gives Ruel a sleeping pill because unconsciousness is kinder than leaving him awake for this. A signal from his ring calls Ganian away to the arriving Blue Knights, so he leaves Ruel in Cassian's hands and heads outside. Cassian sends Eris to help Torto lock down the Knights and hide as much of Ruel's impossible act as they can. Once Eris leaves, Hina peeks out, sees how furious Cassian really is, and offers herself for whatever job he needs done. Cassian gives Hina 2 bottles of black liquid, telling her one is for investigation and the other must go to Tyson with a warning that they found a man who does not die. After Hina vanishes, Cassian pieces the puzzle together further when Leo insists Ruel really did purify that thing even though he is still human. Left alone with the mystery, Cassian remembers Nintra's words about Ruel's filthy blood blocking the Great Start, and starts wondering if the truth is hidden in Ruel's bloodline itself. 2 days later in the carriage, Ruel finally wakes to Leo's tiny sobs and realizes the fox cried hard enough to soak his hands. Cassian tells him they still have not reached the capital, and Leo immediately climbs onto Ruel in teary relief the moment he knows he is really awake. As Leo babbles about how scared he was, Ruel tries to remember a long dream and can only hold on to one line from a huge beautiful scaled being asking him to come back again. Cassian moistens Ruel's dry lips, helps him sit up for water, and quietly asks if he knew his darkness mana could absorb the black substance. Ruel admits he had no idea and only followed instinct, so Cassian drops the bigger reveal. Leo called what he did purification. The word hits so hard that Ruel spits his water out on the spot. Inside the carriage, Leo tearfully confirms that what came out of Ruel was purification, and Ruel is left staring because even he did not know he could do that. Ruel explains that he did not cast the power on purpose and only moved on instinct, then wonders if his rare dark attribute comes from his bloodline or his magic. Cassian bluntly asks whether Ruel has some hero bloodline or divine calling, and Ruel can only answer with an irritated truth. He has no idea why any of this is happening. The mood finally loosens when Ruel asks for food, and as he bites into the meat pie Cassian hands over, he quietly checks his condition and realizes he has grown again from pushing himself to the brink. Then Ruel notices loud chanting outside the soundproof carriage, and Cassian dryly explains that the whole village is praising him as the noble of darkness for saving them and collapsing in the process. Horrified, Ruel demands to know who gave him that title, only to learn that Ganian started it and nobody stopped him. Cassian cracks the window just enough for Ruel to hear the crowd screaming Noble of Darkness in unison, and that one glimpse is enough to make Ruel order it shut immediately. Cassian reassures him that the truth was hidden from the public, so people only tied the title to Ruel's dark clothes and sacrifice. But that does nothing to make the name hurt less. Still coughing, Ruel asks if they can just kill Ganian, and Cassian laughs before admitting Ganian is far beyond what he wants to fight. Once the joking dies down, Cassian shows him a bottle of black water taken from Nitra, and Leo immediately identifies it as something that reeks of a man dragged out of nature's proper order. Ruel tests a hunch and tells Cassian to put 1 drop on Leo, and the black water instantly melts away on contact. That reaction confirms Leo matters against the black water, and Ruel quietly realizes the warning he once saw about always moving with the Great Purifier was probably not random at all. Ruel also points out the bigger problem: Aura did not work on Nitra at all, and even repeated beheadings failed to finish him. When Ruel asks what happened to Nitra, Cassian shocks him by saying Nitra is still alive and now held by the Knights for later questioning. Ruel immediately orders Cassian to bring Nitra to him no matter what maneuvering it takes, because he is done with pawns and wants answers from the source itself. When Leo starts spiraling that he still cannot purify it on his own, Ruel quickly covers his mouth and cuts him off, insisting it is fine because he can do it himself. Cassian cuts in hard and reminds him that even if he can purify it, his body cannot endure another collapse, then presses him for a straight answer about whether he will step in again next time. Ruel tries to dodge the promise by asking whether the hidden Red Ash agents among the Royal Knights were dealt with, but Cassian refuses to let him escape the real issue. Cassian finally says it plainly: if Ruel steps over that line again, he will die next time. That lands hard because Ruel had been too dazed to know how close he came, and even he falls silent when Cassian confirms it was truly that serious. Ruel answers in his own way, saying he is not the same as before and will not do something stupid, but he still refuses to promise he will stay out of danger when only he can handle the threat. Cassian finally backs off enough to report that Torto personally killed the infiltrator they were tracing, and Ruel decides catching Nitra is enough for now. When Ruel asks about the rest of the capital schedule, Cassian lists the remaining ceremonies, dinners, and parade, and the supposedly reduced itinerary is still enough to drain him on the spot. Instead of wasting those days, Ruel brings up Banios' intel that Red Ash may be hiding near the capital in a bar run by Count Bianchin, a name tied to trouble even in the original story. Ruel tells Cassian to investigate Bianchin and the bar anyway, because he refuses to trust anyone else's investigation unless it was done by his own people. At the palace arrival, Ganian immediately asks about Ruel's condition, and Ruel grabs him by the collar because he is still furious over the Noble of Darkness title. Ruel demands that Ganian erase the nickname at once, but Ganian cheerfully insists it is a great name and proudly says even the Blue Knights approve. Cassian quietly reminds them that everyone is watching, so Ruel forces himself to let go before making an even bigger scene in front of the palace. Ganian then makes it worse by saying the title has already spread too far to undo, leaving Ruel to stew over the damage to his name. Hoping for backup, Ganian asks Eris what he thinks, and Eris earnestly says the title suits Ruel because he cannot forget the bravery he saw that day. Leo piles on by excitedly praising Ruel too, happily rubbing against him while Ruel realizes he should never have asked Eris in the first place. Then Torto steps forward and formally thanks Ruel for the courage and sacrifice that saved his life when his own men were wiped out. The royal knights follow with their own salute, and Ganian has the Blue Knights step in too, turning the palace entrance into a full public tribute to Ruel. Ruel can only smile through gritted patience until a coughing fit makes him stumble, and the gathered knights instantly become even more worried about his condition. One of the Blue Knights even suggests bringing a stretcher, and Ruel's face twists because he is sure that would earn him an even worse title before he reaches the royal family. So Ruel shuts that down, grips his cane, and keeps walking under everyone's anxious gaze like a patient trying to prove he can survive one more step. When Torto cautiously asks what breath is after seeing Ruel use it, Ruel flatly says it is nothing and silently warns Ganian not to open his mouth. Before meeting the king, Ruel finally gets time to change, and Ganian keeps reassuring him that the young king knows he is sick and will not be offended if he coughs. Cassian recommends taking painkillers before the audience, because everyone knows Ruel's condition could dip again at any moment. Leo, meanwhile, is busy admiring all the glittering palace decorations while clutching the necklace Jairi gave him. Eris is so nervous about the audience that Ruel has to gently tell him to relax, even though Eris is not the one about to face the king. At the audience chamber, Cassian and Eris have to stop at the door, so Ruel goes in with only Ganian at his side. As Ruel enters the hall to the servant's announcement, nobles immediately stare and whisper about the Noble of Darkness the moment his cane taps across the floor. Ruel had intentionally chosen the brightest outfit he owned, but standing there in it only makes him vow to replace his whole wardrobe with white once he gets home. When Ruel moves to bow, the king stops him and allows both him and Ganian to skip the formalities out of consideration for his health. The king thanks him sincerely for saving the town, and Ruel answers with careful humility that he only did what any person should do. A sudden cough breaks the moment, and the king immediately worries over him. Ganian admits that Ruel was unconscious for 2 days and only woke up today, so the king tries to end the audience and postpone everything until he recovers. Ruel refuses that mercy at once, saying he is here as Laponia's representative, and his country's mission comes before his body. Then Ruel draws out the luxurious letter from Laponia's king and formally presents it to Cyronian's king. With the hall holding its breath, Ruel clearly declares Laponia's will and publicly accepts the alliance with Cyronian. The king lights up at the announcement, while Ruel quietly notes that the nobles' reactions split between relief, greed, and hidden displeasure. Once the king leaves after ordering everyone to treat Ruel as a prized guest, the nobles instantly swarm him with polished smiles and naked ambition. Ruel tries to use his weakness as an escape and deliberately sways as if he might collapse, but the nobles only crowd in harder with even more introductions. Then a hard voice cuts through the hall, and a white-haired man appears at the doorway demanding to know why a guest is being treated so disrespectfully. Ganian immediately stiffens and salutes, and Ruel realizes this fearsome Duke General is Sean Luperos, Ganian's own teacher. Sean apologizes to Ruel for the noble's behavior, and one glare from him is enough to send those same nobles scattering like frightened rabbits. He then turns on Ganian like a disappointed master, asking what his 2 legs are for if he is going to leave an exhausted guest standing there. Sean also apologizes for his disciple dragging a sick man this far, but Ruel smoothly answers that he wanted to see the country where his close friend lives. Pleased, Sean promises they will speak properly later, and Ruel leaves with Ganian already thinking this duke is someone worth getting closer to. After sleeping through the rest of the day, Ruel wakes the next morning and starts dressing for the parade, still feeling how badly purification battered his body. While Cassian works on the outfit, Ruel suddenly asks how far the ice castle is from here, hinting that his mind has already wandered to something far more dangerous than a parade. Cassian explains that the ice castle is a strange snowy stronghold on a high mountain, neither country nor village, ruled only by brutal challenge laws. Those rules are simple and vicious: enter if you want, but fight a resident, and the loser becomes bound to the winner. When Cassian asks if he plans to go there, Ruel calls it tempting, because he sees profit where everyone else only sees a frozen wasteland. Cassian warns that money and status mean nothing there and reminds him of the nobles who died after trying to challenge the place without understanding it. Ruel only pushes back with a sly question about whether Cassian thinks he cannot win there, and Cassian answers with immediate confidence that he can. For the parade itself, Cassian says the speech was cancelled, so all Ruel has to do is smile and wave, which somehow still sounds exhausting. Ruel asks again for brighter clothes, but Cassian points out that this already is the brightest color he owns, which leaves Ruel staring at another outfit that still screams darkness. Off to the side, Leo happily keeps eating the pile of snacks people sent after hearing rumors that Ruel was raising a fox. Leo even offers to share, and Ruel honestly wants a bite, but he refuses because spilling food on this hard-won uniform would force him to dress all over again. Then Ruel ruins Cassian's relief by calmly asking for one meat pie, since he just realized he does not actually have to take the uniform off to eat it. Before the parade even starts, Ruel sees the open-top carriage and looks tired already, because he knows he is about to be displayed like the star attraction. Ganian cheerfully tells him he only has to endure about a minute up top at a time, but Ruel flatly calls the whole thing a meaningless sham. Ganian reminds him that the crowd came to see the Noble of Darkness, and that only makes Ruel want to throttle him more. Right before boarding, Ganian stops Eris to hammer home that he is no longer just a helper but Ruel's knight, with real responsibility on his shoulders. Eris steadies himself and answers that he knows exactly what it means to stand here, because after learning he grew stronger, he now wants to prove he can protect Ruel for real. With Ruel leading on his cane and Eris following, the carriage finally rolls out under Blue Knight escort. The castle gates open, the crowd erupts, and Ruel climbs to the top deck wearing the careful smile he prepared for this exact performance. The winter wind hits him hard, so Leo is wrapped around his neck and the uniform's magic hand warmers are the only reason he can keep waving at all. As soon as Ruel waves, the public shouts for the Noble of Darkness, praising the outsider noble who saved their village. Ganian jokes that Ruel is popular, and Ruel keeps smiling for the crowd while muttering that it is just loud. When Ganian steps into view beside him with the Blue Knight cape flying, the cheers grow even louder, and the two men become a perfect image of Cyronian and Laponia standing together. The parade works exactly as intended, and soon after, Cyronian's king officially declares the alliance with Laponia. Far away in Kron, alarmed nobles immediately argue that the new alliance is clearly meant to isolate their kingdom. The king of Kron stays unimpressed by their panic and scolds them for jumping to conclusions before learning the alliance's real purpose. Then the second prince, Trital, speaks up with a far darker possibility. Rumors say the long-shuttered Tanisk Empire is moving suspiciously again. That name shocks the whole room, because Tanisk was once so powerful that the three kingdoms together could not beat it. Trital says the rumor is spreading near Cyronian's border with Tanisk, and the king grimly decides to postpone judgment until Trital brings back solid proof. Trital accepts the mission and smiles at the obvious envy from the other prince, pleased that he just sees the initiative in court. Back with the delegation, Ruel finally unwraps Leo from his neck, drinks hot tea from Cassian, and feels his frozen body thaw after the parade. Cassian says there were a couple of small disturbances during the parade, but Cyronian stopped them before they became real incidents. Knowing not every noble supports the alliance, Ruel decides to stop wasting time and begins interrogating the captured Nitra despite his own worsening cough. When Nitra refuses to talk, Ruel uses Shadow to clamp his mouth shut, and the terrified prisoner finally starts realizing this sickly boy can still control the room. Ruel asks if Nitra remembers bleeding black blood and turning into a monster, and Nitra's confusion shows that part of the truth was hidden even from him. The moment Nitra starts acting up, Cassian slams his face into the floor and coldly reminds him he only gets to answer, not resist. Ruel presses harder, listing the impossible things Nitra survived, and forces him to face that the black water already changed his body into something no normal human should endure. That breaks him. Nitra finally realizes he must have drunk the black water and that the master he was loyal to treated him as disposable. Ruel twists the knife, mocking the loyalty that got Nitra abandoned, and waits for revenge to do the work that threats alone could not. Leo growls that Nitra still smells wrong even after purification, and Ruel soothes the little spirit while calmly waiting for the prisoner's resentment to turn into a confession. At last Nitra talks. He does not know how black water is made, but he confirms it is something against nature. Then Nitra gives the crucial warning. Red Ash is hunting Ruel because his existence keeps them from finding the thing they are searching for. Nitra tries to tell him to run before he dies, but the mana oath catches up with him first, and he collapses with the light gone from his eyes. Cassian calmly sums it up. Ruel's presence is blocking Red Ash from finding whatever they want, and that is why they keep trying to kill him. Once Cassian removes the corpse, Leo checks on Ruel, and Ruel finally pieces together the ugly truth that his death in the original story would have broken the seal Red Ash needed gone. That means Red Ash never needed to appear openly after Ruel's death before, because once the seal was gone they could just keep working in the shadows. Ruel decides they need answers fast about black water, because Red Ash already proved they can turn people like Nitra into monsters. He calls for Eris and orders him to bring Ganian, pulling Cyronian's side of the alliance into the black water investigation too. After another painful coughing fit, Ruel refuses Leo's request to eat filth, and strips off his stifling outer uniform while waiting for the others. Cassian returns first, spots the discarded uniform, and silently disapproves of Ruel treating a costly formal outfit like trash. Then Ganian arrives, immediately smells blood in the room, and learns that Nitra died after breaking a mana oath instead of under torture. When Cassian hands over a bottle of black water, Ganian instantly recognizes it as the same black substance from before and turns deadly serious. Ruel orders him to investigate it, and warns that red ash has infiltrated deeper than anyone thinks, so Ganian cannot trust people without proof. Ganian answers sincerely, grateful that Ruel trusted him enough to hand over something this dangerous. Ruel then turns to tomorrow's banquet and predicts the nobles who normally target Ganian will come after him instead, with Bayan-chan likely among them because his bar is tied to red ash. Ganian says the third prince already mentioned Bayan too, and Ruel lays out the idea of using an enemy's own ally to deceive them back. By the end of the talk, Ganian is openly intrigued, and Ruel gives him a crooked smile as he asks if he wants the job of stirring everything up. At the banquet the next day, Ruel is forced into a black suit instead of the white one he wanted, and even the grand announcement at the door grates on his nerves. He walks in smiling anyway, and when Eris quietly asks if he hates this that much, Ruel admits he wants to grab Ganian by the collar every time he hears that title parade. Cassian slips in as a titleless servant-like presence, but Ruel reminds Eris that he is now the visible guard everyone will watch and test. When Ruel tells him simply to protect him, Eris locks in and starts treating the room like a battlefield without swords, sorting hostile gazes from neutral ones. Ruel notices how many nobles already see him as a prize, while Leo gets distracted by the enormous spread of banquet food. Now that the alliance is official, Ruel's value has exploded. He is a foreign savior, a noble of Laponia, and exactly the kind of connection every high-ranking house wants. Before the waiting nobles can surround him, Ganian moves first, and their frustration is obvious because they fear he will block them again. Ganian loudly greets Ruel like an old friend in full view of everyone, making their closeness even more obvious than the parade did. Then Ganian casually tries to peel Eris away with food, and the nobles immediately seize on the idea that Ruel's escort might be easier to approach than Ruel himself. Eris refuses politely, staying on duty, and Ganian pushes the act a little further by loading a plate anyway just to keep the room's attention where Ruel wants it. Ruel lets the bait sit, because anyone bold enough to approach despite Ganian's presence is exactly the kind of person he came here to expose. He thinks through the obvious red ash methods here, poison in the food or an attack in the crowd, and knows killing him at this banquet would be worth the risk for them. Most people in the room do not realize Cassian is hidden in Ruel's shadow and ready to strike the moment anyone makes a move. Then the first real player steps up. Bayan-chan approaches with a wine glass, ignoring Ganian's hostile stare and greeting Ruel with perfect politeness. Bayan flatters Ruel as a true noble for helping people in a foreign country, and Ruel answers modestly while watching him far more carefully than he lets on. Ruel's sudden cough gives Eris the opening he needs, and he smoothly interrupts to say the Lord should rest for a while. Eris supports Ruel toward the lounge exactly as planned, and the nobles who had been waiting their turn can only watch in frustration. On his way out, Ruel loudly tells Ganian to inform him if the prince arrives, making sure everyone nearby hears that he still expects important company. Once Ruel is gone, Ganian drops the smile, warns the visiting noble not to toy with a sick man's life, and starts memorizing the faces of everyone drifting after Ruel. Ruel, meanwhile, quietly connects Bayan to the same kind of greed and inferiority that Red Ash has exploited in other people before. When Eris reports that several people are following them, Ruel is relieved that even if the details changed, the core trap is unfolding almost exactly as he hoped. The moment he can finally sit down, hunger hits him, because the banquet food is too risky for his body and allergies to trust. Eris saves the situation by producing the emergency meat pie Cassian prepared, and Ruel accepts it without hesitation. The familiar meat pie finally settles Ruel a little, and when Leo scampers over for his share, Ruel stuffs a bite into the little spirit's mouth to stop the fuss. Even in the middle of the trap, the three share a tiny breath of normalcy over the snack, right up until the knocking starts at the door. An unnamed noble slips into the lounge acting surprised to find Ruel there, but the fake innocence is so transparent that Ruel is already laughing at the act inside. Ruel starts to rise out of courtesy, but the visiting noble quickly tells him to stay down and rest, using concern as an excuse to settle into the room. The visiting noble keeps circling through polite talk about Cyronian instead of saying what he wants, until Ruel cuts in and makes it clear he hates people who talk in circles. Forced to drop the small talk, the noble admits he wants to get close to Ruel, and Ruel answers with a cold question about what he can actually offer. That is when the noble finally shows his real card, glancing toward Eris before quietly offering help with Red Ash and claiming he can reveal one of their hideouts. The offer tells Ruel exactly what he needed. Someone leaked the investigation, and he now strongly suspects Spanios was the source. Ruel keeps the game going and pointedly asks whether this noble was not supposed to kill him, testing how openly the man will sell out Red Ash for his own gain. The noble answers that Red Ash promised him something too trivial to matter now, so he is ready to sell them out if Ruel can offer something better. He pushes further by claiming Red Ash can lead him to what Ruel wants too, trying to build quick trust by offering a shared enemy. Then Ruel catches the noble's brief glance toward the window, and in that tiny tell he spots the real move hiding underneath the conversation. In the palace lounge, Bayan tries to sound friendly and greedy like Ruel, but the noise outside makes him glance at the window in sudden unease. Ruel stops pretending and calls Eris, and a ring of sharp ice instantly hovers at Bayan's throat. Ruel bluntly tells Bayan he will not be manipulated and that Bayan should worry about what is really happening around them. He reveals that the people Bayan expected are not coming to help at all, because Red Ash is the group attacking the palace tonight. Ruel twists the knife further, warning that Bayan's hunt for family honor is about to end with the Chin name disgraced and his own execution. To prove it, Ruel calls for Cassian, who rises from the shadows holding a bloodied man that Bayan recognizes at once. Cassian says they already secured testimony and evidence that Bayan led the plot, and Bayan finally understands he has been trapped from the beginning. Ruel points to the uproar outside and makes Bayan realize the Blue Knights are already crushing Red Ash around the banquet hall. Faced with ruin, Bayan drops all pride and begs desperately for his life. Ruel shuts down the begging and demands answers instead. With Eris enforcing the magic, Bayan admits he made a mana oath with Red Ash not to reveal the group's existence or purpose to outsiders. Ruel spots the loophole and orders Bayan to swear a new mana oath to tell only the truth in front of him. Once the oath is set, Ruel asks where the leak came from, and Bayan reveals that servant Renar from Prince Banios' side swapped information on Red Ash's orders. Ruel presses for Red Ash's base, and Bayan says he only knows a temporary hideout under a storage warehouse in the town of Tryon. But when Ruel asks about his illness and the black water, Bayan cannot answer, which tells Ruel that the black water is tied directly to Red Ash's true purpose. Ruel decides not to kill him and instead turns Bayan into an informant, ordering him to become his ears inside Red Ash. He orders Bayan to report every scrap of Red Ash information and promises to send his own communicator soon. Before leaving, Ruel warns that one reckless word will destroy the entire Chin family, and Eris adds that careless talk is life-threatening. As the door shuts, Bayan cracks and laughs like a madman, furious that every report about sick, powerless Ruel was a complete lie. Elsewhere in the palace, Ganian leaves the hall carrying a discarded wooden skewer, amused that a harmless-looking tool will cause the least political trouble later. Through his communication ring, Ganian orders his men to kill half of the infiltrators as soon as they make a suspicious move. Ganian picks out a fake servant on sight and throws the skewer hard enough to expose the assassin's cover. When the disguised servant flashes a hidden sword, Ganian rushes in and drives the skewer through the attacker's neck. Ganian calmly reports the bodies in Hall Area 2-1 and keeps moving to finish the cleanup around the lounge. After leaving Bayan, Ruel enters another empty lounge with Eris, and uses a ring to tell Ganian the rest can be handled now. Ganian casually replies that everything is already finished and the commotion has already died down. Ruel is irritated because that was not the plan, but Ganian cheerfully admits he was too angry to leave enemies alive and cuts the call off on his own. Since the mess is done, Ruel switches rings and contacts Prince Banios directly. He asks Banios about a servant named Renar, and the prince's heavy sigh says enough before he even apologizes. Ruel tells Banios that Renar traded hideout information, accepts the prince's apology, and coolly says he now owes him one. He tells Banios to keep watching the second prince, but the prince reports no visible movement yet. Just before ending the call, Ruel adds a serious warning: if Banios sees anyone bleeding black blood, he must avoid them and only observe. With the main objective done, Ruel steadies himself and decides to use the remaining banquet days to pull more noble strings, especially through merchant-owning aristocrats. Then his body reminds him of its limits, and the first thing he admits is that he is hungry. Leo excitedly points him toward the food, but Ruel knows he cannot eat carelessly and asks Eris for the medicine Cassian prepared instead. Ruel says he might get sick if he pushes himself, swallows the medicine, and heads back out to face the nobles again. The moment he opens the door, nobles are already waiting for him, neatly gathered as if they organized themselves around his rising influence. Later that night, Leo wakes Ruel in the dark because Cassian and Ganian are fighting again and the ground is trembling. When Ruel looks outside, he sees distant blue and purple flashes cutting across the night sky, and he instantly realizes those two idiots are going all out. He urgently calls Eris and orders him to drag them back immediately, but Eris gently asks him to let them be, saying the black-blooded enemy shattered everything they thought they knew, and both men are working that out through the fight. Ruel hears the anxiety in Eris's voice, tells him to go anyway, and Eris leaves with that unease still hanging in the room. Once Eris is gone, Leo curls close and sadly says this body is unstable too, wishing he could purify the problem himself. Ruel reassures him and explains that when he purified black blood before, it felt more like instinct than something he consciously understood. Leo stays awake staring into the dark, quietly caught on the word instinct after Ruel closes his eyes again. Morning sunlight wakes Ruel in an unfamiliar room, and Ganian greets him with a bright smile and terrible timing. Ganian casually admits he forgot to mention it last night, but the king wanted to meet Ruel, so he brought a sleeping Ruel to his family villa before dawn. The moment Ruel understands that the king is waiting because of Ganian's stunt, he grabs Ganian by the collar in pure outrage and starts coughing from the strain. Before Ganian can explain himself, the king personally appears at the door and says he was the one who ordered them not to wake Ruel. Ruel immediately gets out of bed and apologizes, but the king waves off the formality and treats the room like a relaxed private visit, not a royal audience. Huswin even drags a chair to Ruel's bedside himself and tells him to sit comfortably, showing just how familiar his bond with Ganian really is. Once they settle, the king gets straight to the point and confirms that Ruel knows about Red Ash. Ruel confirms it and adds the worst part. Red Ash wants him dead because his very existence acts like a seal on something they are searching for. Husband asks if this came from Nitra, and Ruel confirms it did through a broken mana oath, though even he still does not know what Red Ash will unleash if they find that thing. Ruel then reveals that Bianchin exposed the temporary Red Ash hideout in Tryon, and the king is furious that nobles in his country were involved at all. Instead of asking for a reward, Ruel asks the king for something more useful, an official excuse to move the knights. Ruel says he will not go to Tryon himself, but he is very interested in visiting the nearby village of Dotol. Husband plays along at once, praising Dotol like a sightseeing spot and promising Ruel a comfortable trip there. Then the king seals it by ordering Ganian to escort the precious guest to Dotol and subdue monsters in Tryon on the way, giving the entire Blue Knights a perfect reason to move. Before leaving, Husband asks which Leponian prince Ruel supports, and Ruel clearly names Banios. Satisfied, the king tells Ruel to enjoy himself and recover his health, then leaves the villa room. Once the king is gone, Ruel quietly studies Ganian and asks about Bayan's old grudge against his family. Ganian angrily explains that Bayan was not robbed of frontier honor at all, he lost it himself through military corruption and should be grateful he was spared. That answer leaves Ruel thinking grimly about how much his own interference has already changed the story, because Bayan should have been dead by now. The mood snaps again when Cassian suddenly appears with killing intent and grabs Ganian by the neck for letting the king meet Ruel at all. Ruel calmly asks whether Ganian still has many swords at home, and Cassian visibly pauses at the idea. When Ruel tells Cassian to let him go, the two men instantly start bickering over who actually won their nighttime fight. Ruel cuts off the pointless contest with one practical answer: let's just eat. Later, Ganian opens his family arsenal, revealing room after room of polished weapons that immediately catch both Cassian's eye and Leo's eye. Ruel reminds Ganian of his debt, and Ganian generously tells them to look around and take as much as they want. Cassian moves immediately, and Ruel reminds him not to forget picking a new sword for Eris too. Since he cannot judge swords himself, Ruel leaves the selection to Cassian and walks off with Ganian down the hallway. After walking a while, Ruel finally asks the question Ganian does not want to hear at all: who really won that fight with Cassian? Late at night, Ruel finally eats in his room while Cassian tidies up beside him, and a communicator call from Ketlin cuts into the quiet. Ketlin reports that someone from Red Ash offered Prio's bloodline information in exchange for details on Ruel, proving the enemy has started sniffing around Satyria's hidden involvement. Instead of panicking, Ruel decides to feed Red Ash carefully chosen useless information so the real secrets stay buried under believable noise. He warns Ketlin to accept only a broad mana oath, refuse anything too specific, and report back first if there is any real risk. When Ketlin awkwardly asks if Ruel is eating well and surviving life abroad, Ruel cuts the call fast before another health lecture can start. Leo pops up jealously over all the attention Ruel gets, and Ruel casually tells the sulking spirit to focus on his own rice bowl. Ruel shifts to tomorrow's real concern and asks about Bayan, Tryon, and a nearby map, making Cassian instantly suspicious that sightseeing is not all he has in mind. Cassian worries because Ruel still has not recovered from purification, but Ruel lightly promises he will only do a little sightseeing after the banquet. Studying Tryon and nearby Dotol, Ruel quietly decides the distance is just right for the thing he wants to pick up by accident during the trip. Then Ruel abruptly changes course and tells Cassian that he will not be going to Tryon at all. Instead, he orders Cassian and Ganian to lead the strike on the temporary hideout with the Royal Knights and Blue Knights, partly to smoke out any rats hidden among them. Ruel insists he would only get in the way there, so while they handle the raid, he will simply go sightseeing elsewhere and pick up what he wants. Cassian's face brightens so much at the thought of Ruel staying away from the hideout that Ruel ends the talk with a sour look and goes back to eating. Much later, after making sure Ruel is asleep, Cassian slips alone into the rear garden and draws his treasured sword to think about the black-blooded man who would not die. The failure rattles him because he always believed anything could be cut, and now his assassin's pride turns into a hard promise to find a way to kill that enemy. Ganian finds Cassian in the garden during patrol, teases him about dealing with sickly stubborn Ruel, and Cassian answers by asking for a match. When Cassian asks whether there is truly anything Aura cannot cut, Ganian drops the joking tone at once because the same question has been haunting him too. Ganian agrees to the match with full confidence, and the two fighters head off ready to test their answer with blades instead of words. By morning, Leo blurts out that Cassian won the duel, exposing Ganian before he can save face. Ganian tries to claim he only let his guard down, but even while praising the short fight for showing him a path forward, his frustration is obvious. Ruel cuts through the martial excitement, and reminds Ganian that they need teamwork, because the black-blooded threat is still out there and time is not on their side. Then Ruel makes Ganian promise again not to covet whatever Ruel finds on the trip, pointedly bringing up the sword Ganian once broke. Before that talk can go any further, a butler rushes in with news that Sean Luperos has arrived, and Ganian bolts out the door in panic. Ruel follows the butler, puzzled about why Sean wants to see him, while the sharp tap of a cane already hints that this meeting will not be casual. Inside, Ruel finds Ganian already being punished by Scene in a humiliating squat with his arms out, all because he got too excited and challenged Cassian while neglecting a guest's safety. When Ganian tries to argue that the duel mattered, Scene silently adds 2 stones to his lap and shuts him up on the spot. Once seated, Ruel learns Scene came because Ganian told him everything, which immediately makes Ruel realize this disciple's mouth is far looser than expected. Even though Scene is Ganian's teacher, Ruel refuses to relax until Scene proves he is not tied to Red Ash. Scene accepts the demand at once and makes a mana oath that he is not, and never will be, part of Red Ash. Ruel accepts the oath but also notes that even mana vows have loopholes, so trust still has to be handled carefully. Then Scene gets to the real reason for the meeting and says his side has confirmed movement around the so-called Black Water case. The next words hit much harder. Scene says the sealed Tonisk Empire opened and closed its door once, which looks like the first sign that the abolished empire may be preparing to rise again. Ruel instantly understands why Scene proposed an alliance before, because if the empire truly returns, the entire balance of power will collapse. Scene asks Ruel to carry this warning straight to the king of Laponia, since Red Ash infiltration makes the delegation's representative the safest messenger available. Ruel agrees at once, deciding he now has every reason to return quickly instead of treating the trip like a light outing. Scene offers to increase Ruel's escort, but Ruel politely refuses because more guards could just mean more chances for Red Ash to slip closer. Tea arrives, Leo instantly fixates on the apple tea he loves, and the room finally eases out of politics into something more personal. Scene warmly tells Ruel to use Ganian as much as he wants during his stay in Cyronian, and Ruel happily accepts that offer with no intention of going easy on him. After a surprisingly good visit, Ruel heads back to the palace at sunset, still turning over one grim thought. If the Empire's door is opening now, what changed? Back inside, Ruel lies down after taking his new medicine while Cassian obsessively sharpens a newly acquired sword and complains that such a masterpiece had been thrown in with low-grade blades. When Ruel asks what is so special about it, Cassian launches into a full lecture that this blade is clearly the work of the legendary blacksmith Leone. Leo, still upset about being denied apple tea earlier, cheers himself up by drinking as much apple tea as he wants back at the palace. Then Cassian interrupts himself because Bayan is calling through the communicator, much sooner than Ruel expected. Bayan nervously warns that Red Ash may leave the temporary hideout soon, so if Ruel wants it, he needs to move fast. Ruel immediately realizes that anyone ordered to destroy a hideout must have blueprints or key data, so he corners Bayan with the answer before she can hide it. He orders her to quietly leave every document on her desk so his side can copy them, and with that one instruction he turns her warning into usable leverage. Ruel only has to glance at Cassian for him to understand, and a moment later the butler vanishes into the shadows to deal with it himself. As soon as Cassian leaves, Leo starts whining that after eating something sweet and sour he desperately wants to eat something dirty too. Ruel tells him to wait until Cassian gets back, and Leo looks crushed enough to burst into tears over the delayed meal. But with Cassian gone, Ruel spots a chance to test his upgraded shadow control and quietly bribes Hina to look the other way in exchange for petting Leo later. Hina accepts on one condition, that he does not overdo it enough to vomit blood again, and then slips back into hiding. Ruel sits up, cycles mana through his body, and carefully starts pulling out shadows to see how much the strength and resistance can now handle. To his satisfaction, he pulls out 5 more shadows than before and still does not collapse, proving the power of resistance really changed his limits. Leo mistakes the Ring of Shadows for a game setup, and Ruel immediately turns it into a new round of hide-and-seek across the whole room. A quick shadow tickle is all it takes to flip Leo from sad to laughing, and Ruel uses that mood swing to lure him into the chase. The game begins in earnest as Leo scrambles across furniture, and Ruel sends shadow hands after his tail from every direction. Leo keeps narrowly escaping, but maintaining all those separate shadows is harder than Ruel expected, and his breathing starts to roughen again. Ruel spreads 5 shadows into a trap for Leo, but Leo slips past again and pops up at his side like he was never caught. Leo stops the game by dropping his face into Ruel's lap and complains that too many dirty things have been added. Proud of winning, Leo flips onto his back and demands the reward he really wanted all along, belly rubs. When Ruel notices Leo has gotten faster, Leo excitedly says the wind warned him because it was worried. Then Leo leaps into Ruel's arms and shows off a new silver sphere that feels unmistakably sacred. Eris rushes in after sensing strange mana, then freezes at the sight of Leo's warm silver light. Leo quietly admits he kept thinking about Ruel being sick when he could not purify anything, and that sadness is what let this new light appear. Ruel breaks into a sudden cough, but he still pets Leo and softly congratulates him on finally awakening real purification. Eris studies the silver sphere and realizes it feels completely unlike Ruel's old purification, while Ruel quietly confirms Leo's light is the real thing. Just as Ruel decides to test it, Cassian returns and immediately gets dragged into Leo's demand for approval. Leo proudly shows Cassian the tiny silver sphere again, and even Cassian can tell at once that this nail-sized light is something different. At Ruel's order, Cassian places a single drop of black water on the floor so they can test Leo's new power for real. Leo presses the silver sphere to the black water, and for a second nothing obvious happens. leaving everyone wondering if it failed. Cassian spots the trick first and points out that the black water has actually shrunk, even if Leo's purification is still tiny. That is all Leo needs to hear, and in his excitement he stomps on the black water and purifies it completely in one sizzling burst. Ruel immediately moves from celebration to usefulness and asks Leo to explain exactly how he did it. Leo runs over to Eris to lecture him like a little master, and Eris sits down to listen seriously. While Leo enjoys his moment, Ruel turns to the information Bayan gathered on the Red Ash hideout and starts plotting a much nastier trap of his own. Later, Ruel privately briefs Torto on the mission and reminds him that an insider still exists among the Royal Knights. Ruel warns that the traitor may be connected to this Tryon mission itself, so Torto must keep the Royal Order secret until they arrive and deal with anyone suspicious after that. To test Torto's loyalty, Ruel bluntly suggests that only someone very high up could have planted an insider inside the Royal Knights. Torto leaves deeply unsettled, still devoted to Laponia but no longer able to trust his old assumptions so easily. After Torto goes, Cassian notes that Ruel pushed too hard, but Ruel admits he meant to shake him because more people need to start seeing the truth. The strain immediately catches up to him when chest pain triggers another cough, and Cassian offers medicine that Ruel refuses for the moment. Even so, Ruel pushes ahead with the trip and lightly wonders if Dotal Village's lake will be as pretty as the one in Prina. 2 days into the journey, after stopping in a nearby village, Ruel hears Dion report that rumors about his illness have faded and the second prince still is not moving. Ruel is pleased that attention has fallen off him, but the prince's silence only gives him more to worry about. He keeps turning possibilities over in his head, wondering whether Red Ash stayed quiet because Banios was watching too closely. Leo taps his hand with his tail for attention, and that small interruption is enough to break Ruel out of his spiral for a moment. Seeing how troubled he looks, Cassian suggests a little fresh air and reminds him that Banios, the birds, and Bayan are all still working the angles he cannot watch himself. Ruel knows Cassian is right, but because his life hangs on other people's moves, he still cannot stop worrying. He finally agrees to step outside, and Cassian makes him bundle up properly before allowing even a short walk. Eris joins the outing, and along the way villagers recognize the famed magic swordsman one by one. The first step into the quiet snow finally eases Ruel a little, until Ganian appears too because Scene ordered him not to leave Ruel's side. Cassian hates the interruption, Ganian shrugs it off, and Ruel decides there is no point fighting it if Ganian is going to follow anyway. So Ruel just keeps walking through the unknown village, listening to Leo chatter, Ganian brag, and Eris quietly add comments from the side. The walk and the stars clear his head enough for Ruel to finally feel, for one quiet stretch, that resting really does help. Even in that calm, Ruel is still planning ahead, regretting that he will miss the Red Ash hideout raid and already thinking about what he needs ready in Dotal. Then a brief wave of dizziness makes him stumble, and the whole group instantly turns anxious. Ruel says it was only a moment of dizziness, and Cassian guides him to a flat rock so he can sit down. The mood suddenly flips when Leo bolts into the open snowfield, dives in headfirst, and starts kicking his buried little legs in pure joy. Eris rushes over to pull Leo out, only for Leo to excitedly tell him to try jumping into the snow too. Once Ruel gives the tiniest nod, Eris throws himself into the drift with both arms spread like a child. Watching them laugh from the rock, Ruel coughs but also feels the rare comfort of seeing people around him act like idiots. Ganian's voice joins in, the game turns into a noisy snowball fight, and for a moment the whole tension of the trip melts away. Leo even threatens to make himself bigger, Ganian talks about using aura, and the whole scene becomes a ridiculous contest. Cassian covers Ruel with a blanket and quietly points out that watching fools can calm a person down, and this time Ruel has to admit he is right. That gentle moment breaks when a snowball suddenly smacks into Ruel's face, and Ganian cheerfully boasts about his aim. Cassian shoots back with a cold insult, but his hand on Ruel's forehead tells him the joke has already turned serious. Ruel's fever spikes almost instantly, and Cassian realizes he has been too careless with someone this fragile. Cassian gives him a fever reducer, and Ruel is so drained he can barely do more than nod. Leo declares he will scold Ganian, but even that indignation collapses when Ruel points out Leo was part of the chaos too. Shut down at once, Leo curls up beside Ruel in guilty silence. Back in the lodging, Eris quietly opens the door to check on Ruel, and is immediately hit with the sight of him sick in bed again. Ashamed for letting the fun distract him from escort duty, Eris looks to Cassian, but Cassian silently signals him not to say anything more. Ruel weakly dismisses the worry as just another usual fever and closes his eyes, insisting he will be better by tomorrow. By morning, Ruel is still burning with fever from the trip, but he forces his dizzy body into the carriage anyway. Ganian starts to apologize for yesterday, but Ruel cuts straight to the real issue and asks if the Red Ash investigation is moving. After hearing the operation is in progress, Ruel tells Ganian to stop dwelling on guilt and handle the job properly. That blunt trust hits hard, and Ganian steps away looking steadier and more determined. In front of the assembled Blue Knights, Ganian rallies them with a sharp vow to protect the one they are escorting. Back in the moving carriage, Cassian offers more fever medicine, but Ruel refuses because he already took some earlier. Leo looks miserable after pelting Ruel with snowballs, and Ruel only pats him instead of blaming him. Cassian quietly offers one last chance to head for Tryon instead, but Ruel still refuses to go. A violent cough suddenly brings blood to Ruel's mouth, and Cassian quickly catches it with a handkerchief. Even while recovering from the fit, Ruel makes his reason plain. The only reason he is going to Tryon is the black-blooded man. By sunset, Ganian parts ways with Ruel's carriage at a fork in the road so his force can swing off and hit the hideout by surprise. When Ruel asks about him, Cassian says Hina will go to Tryon in his place tonight because something feels off. The road stays unnervingly quiet all the way to Dotol, and that silence leaves Ruel more uneasy than an open attack would. After confirming the temporary hideout is real and active, Ruel finally says what the quiet means. The enemy is lying in wait. Ruel checks Leo for the black-blooded man's scent, and when Leo says no, he decides Cassian should still be enough for whatever comes. At Dotol village, Ruel steps out and pauses at the sight of a lake behind the tiny houses, glittering with reflected stars. Leo gets excited by the lake and begs to jump into the starry water, but Ruel only promises later and starts toward their lodging. The village street is so still that only Ruel's cane and the knight's footsteps carry through the night, and Cassian quietly warns that the enemy is moving. Eris senses the wrongness first, draws his sword, and the escort knights instantly shift into battle formation. The ambush starts when every light in Dotol suddenly dies at once, and the whole village drops into heavy darkness. Eris answers the darkness by throwing fire into the sky, and with Leo's help it blooms into a blazing bird that lights the village. In that sudden light, the hidden attackers are exposed and arrows start slamming into the knights' shields. The vice-captains order the enemy wiped out, while a guard ring forms around Ruel and pushes him toward the carriage. Eris cuts down a close attacker in one brutal strike and warns the knights that a mage is mixed in with the enemy. He follows with tiny ice shards that shatter incoming magic, opening the way for the knights to counterattack. As Ruel nears the carriage, a hidden enemy inside is suddenly killed by a well-timed arrow from the dark, exactly as Ruel had hoped. When Cassian asks if he still plans to pick up his target in the middle of all this, Ruel calmly tells him to keep watching. Then Leo screams a warning, and Cassian yanks Ruel backward just before black masses crash into the carriage and obliterate it. Ruel sees the knights who had been guarding him struck down, and realizes the enemy finally brought not one black-blooded man, but several. That is when it clicks for him. In a tiny village like Dotol, this attack was planned as a full massacre, not just an assassination. Knowing the black-blooded men will crush everyone if the formation holds, Ruel shouts for all of them to retreat at once. He points Eris toward the danger, and Eris's light reveals one of the black-blooded men clearly enough for the others to understand. The knights begin to pull back, but the vice-captains still refuse to abandon Ruel and gather around him instead. Ruel is furious because their chivalry is turning into a pointless group death trap. Eris and Leo combine their power again, and Eris drives his sword into the ground to unleash a wave of freezing ice across the battlefield. The frozen field buys them a breath, but Leo immediately warns that some of the things outside the world's order are still moving. Ignoring the knights' protests, Ruel walks forward himself because staying clustered around him will only get everyone killed. As he advances, Ruel uses his shadow to catch one of the black things seeping through the dark. Dizzy and half-collapsing, he still forces the vice-captains to spread out by telling them plainly that he is the target, and they do not need to die with him. When Ruel openly calls himself the bait, the black-blooded men lock onto him at once. A thick black stream surges for him, but Eris swings his ice-wrapped sword and freezes the attack in mid-motion. The ice only slows them, and Cassian rushes in to start carving a black-blooded man apart over and over, searching for the real killing point. After pushing his aura to the limit, Cassian finally catches the right line and cleanly severs the black stream inside the body. This time the monster truly melts down, proving to everyone that the black-blooded men are not immortal after all. Then a special arrow from somewhere off-screen hits another black-blooded man, exposing a tiny shining drop inside and giving Eris a clear target. Eris stabs the shining spot without hesitation, and that black-blooded man melts too. Ruel quickly pieces it together. Each black-blooded man hides one drop of black water in a different spot, and cutting that exact point is what kills it. When Ruel checks, Cassian confirms the hidden monitors have already been eliminated, so no witness can report how this fight really turned out. With 5 black-blooded men still left, Ruel decides to end it himself and tells Cassian to clean up the rest. Leo desperately begs to do it instead, but Ruel tells him to sleep and takes full control of his shadow. This time Ruel does not just borrow darkness on instinct, he commands it directly and orders it to eat every black thing in sight. Each piece the shadow devours stabs through Ruel in return, and blood starts pouring from both his mouth and nose. He keeps forcing more and more of it anyway, until his cane slips from his hand and Eris and Cassian have to catch him. Watching Ruel break down, Leo runs to the wrapped shadow and tries to force purification into it with his little silver bead. Nothing happens at first, and Leo starts begging in tears because he knows Ruel is collapsing because of this. When Ruel coughs up even more blood, Leo finally shouts in public and runs back, breaking his promise to stay hidden. At that exact moment, the silver beads Leo left behind crack open, and silver light starts climbing through Ruel's shadow. Leo falls into Ruel's arms, and the instant his feet touch him, Ruel's body lightens and black blood pours out instead of red. Then Leo's true purification erupts from the shadow in a silver beam so vast and beautiful it looks like the Milky Way rising into the sky. Ruel thinks only that it is beautiful, feels Leo's tears on his face, and finally loses consciousness. At the other battlefield, Ganian suddenly stops mid-operation because he feels something warm and wrong from far away. The numbers at the hideout no longer make sense to him, so he quietly calls Torto over and asks if he felt it too. Because Torto's real duty is protecting Ruel, Ganian sends him ahead to return first while he finishes securing the hideout. Just after that, one of Cassian's shadows intercepts Ganian with a message and confirms the worst. Black-blooded men appeared at Dotol. Hina says the knights are safe and Ruel is not as bad as expected, but Ganian knows exactly how reckless Ruel must have been to make that happen. Calling Ruel a fool under his breath, Ganian breaks into a run back toward him. Later, with his condition still awful, Ruel calmly announces that he is going to disappear for a while. He immediately vomits black blood again, making it very clear that better than expected still means nowhere near healthy. Ruel lays out the cover story. Officially, he simply got sicker during the Dotol trip and is recuperating in Ganian's villa as a close friend. Ganian groans that this will dump all the political burden on him, and Ruel agrees without any guilt at all. Ruel adds that Tordo has already been told to stay quiet and keep the villa secure, and Ganian assures him that place is safe. Ganian can tell from the way Ruel is talking that this is not really a plan to rest, so he presses him on where he intends to go next. Ruel answers that he was planning to go to the ice castle, and the room freezes in disbelief. Ganian explodes, calling him insane because the ice castle is exactly the kind of place someone in Ruel's condition should never be aiming for. To make Ganian face the truth, Ruel offers his hand, and Ganian's own check confirms he is hanging on by sheer stubbornness. Ruel still insists that this is exactly why he has to go now, because he may never be well enough to make the trip again.